I can introduce Warren and Tracy, who are at the other end of the table as well. Dylan, I'm not sure if you can see them, but Warren and Tracy. So Warren is part of both part of the Department of Internal Affairs, and they sit on a couple of responsibilities. Warren, both of them actually sit across the local government area, but Tracy specialises in the regional deals side of the house. And Warren, you represent DIA at the Grow Well Whaiora arrangement, which Dylan will touch on. And it's sort of, if you think of the regional deals, the Grow Well Whaiora piece to that, which is slightly disconnected. It's something that's a spatial plan and all that sort of stuff. It sort of encapsulates a couple of things that Queenstown have embarked on in the last few years. It has Mana Whenua partners in there, also has Ministers of the Crown as part of that. And so as we sort of work our way through the regional deals, there's a conversation to be had, and we'll start today about that as well. So they're here principally because they will be a partner to the regional deals from the government point of view. And so they will also be able to answer questions that you may have about the framework, the policy, and also about Grow Well Whaiora, which is what Dylan's going to touch on. And I think you've probably seen quite a bit of literature over the last couple of days on some of this stuff as well. So anyway, the government are here to help us. And then later on after this, actually, we're going to talk about local water done well as well. And then Marlon will join us, another member of the DIA team, who is providing advice and that sort of stuff to councils around that whole transition program associated with local water. So maybe at that point, we can hand over to you, Dylan, and the Mayor.
Perfect. I think we're recording it.
Yep.
So we're not live, but we will record it. Check it out later, and hopefully it's an awesome turnout. Thank you all for making the effort to come today. I think it'll be really good to have the opportunity to ask loads of questions and get our heads around it as council before we have the others in the room, which was not quite how I intended the day to go, but that's all right. We'll just be the most informed at this point, which is awesome. So fire away, Dylan.
Awesome. Thanks, Tamer. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, Warren and Tracy, for attending as well, because you are certainly experts in much of this, and you'll have a lot of that background knowledge that I won't necessarily. So please jump in at various stages. And apologies, councillors, for the avalanche of information that's come into your inbox in this last few days. There's certainly a fair amount of detail floating around, and I hate to tell you, but there will be plenty more to come. So you're warned, I suppose, is the point there. So we will touch on today, we will go over the Grow Well partnership, the urban growth partnerships that are across the country, touch on what are regional deals, and then go through, and I want to stress, hence why it's in bold, the draft regional deal packages. So there's currently 8, if you like, packages that have been put together between QLDC, ourselves, and ORC, primarily driven by QLDC, and so that's why you'll see they have a very much a Queenstown slant to them, with a bit of input from CLDC. That's getting further rounded out every time we have a conversation, which included earlier this week, so I'll be able to fill in a little bit more from what's on those already. And then between 11 and 11:30 we'll have Penny, who's leading this piece of work from QLDC, joining us as well, so she can answer any questions that you may have regarding QLDC interests in this. So we'll whip into the first slide. So it is a bit around the urban growth partnerships. So Warren, please jump in if I get this wrong, but my understanding is across the country there are 6 urban growth partnerships. I can't hear Warren's end of the table, but that's okay. I'll go with that for now. And of course, there's the Queenstown one that we've been having a conversation with since around September that CODC should consider joining. And that's almost a precursor to any activity in a regional deal. As Peter touched on, it's got the key partners in there already, and it would make good sense for us to look at joining that partnership. Peter, you might be able to speak from a Wellington perspective around the Wellington regional leadership group that you had there and how that kind of came about.
He could, but he just ducked out of the room to find his glasses. So.
Okay, all right.
Well, and he'll be it as well.
Okay, well, go on the Queenstown one. So I've sat in on one meeting. I was invited to come in as an observer into one of the Queenstown meetings recently. I guess the key for us is, I guess it started around spatial planning and how to deliver spatial plans, and what government's role or the way government can assist in delivering spatial plan. And of course, theirs is focused on Queenstown at this stage. But there's also access into officials and ministers that we typically wouldn't get ourselves as CODC. And I think that's a big opportunity and advantage for us. If we go in there, we can have conversations with different ministers or different ministers' officials around the things and the challenges we're seeing in our part of the world. And in fairness, from what I observed in the Queenstown meeting, many of the challenges that we are seeing are very similar to the challenges Queenstown is seeing. We're probably just either a few years behind them or we're not seeing them on the same scale. So in many regards, we could learn a lot from the challenges and the learnings that Queenstown is going through in the particular areas. Any questions from councillors around this partnership at this stage?
Phil, it's Neil, not so much a question, but any surprise with the front page of the ADT today?
Yeah, thank you.
I have not seen the front page of the ADT. What is that?
Sounds like we've done a done deal over hospitals.
There is I believe it's come from France potentially, that an announcement, what do we call it, an announcement? Not an announcement. Some comments from Ross Buckland and Rod Drury around what in a partnership deal, and it, I believe, I haven't seen the whole article, insinuates that CODC and QLDC are doing a deal that involves building a hospital in Queenstown and Gondola. I was not aware that the deal was that far progressed, but that's what they've come up with.
Right.
The Gondola it's particularly helpful.
Mr. Lewis said that the QIDC have teamed up with CODC and the Otago Regional Council on their bid, and we're working very closely with them to get final submissions government by February 28.
Which
so I guess
huge steer into residents in this part of the world, and especially operatives at Clyde as far as our hospital is concerned.
It was not particularly helpful.
No, it's obviously not helpful to actually what is the conversation that is happening, because while Mayor Lewis is not incorrect, we are having conversations, and obviously Tammy, you've been part of those conversations. That's not the full picture. There's a much broader picture in the networked approach, which actually is one of the packages we'll be talking about later. Sorry, I wasn't aware of that article. I'm not entirely surprised, I guess I would say, that we're seeing partners from the private sector jumping up and saying, hey, we would like to be part of this, or we have an opportunity to offer a solution. I guess they're seizing the opportunity to make sure that they're the first consideration or cab off the rank, if you like, which isn't a silly move if you're in the private sector and looking for support and funding. And it's not incorrect. We are one of the transport papers, the packages we'll be discussing later, is the option of a gondola, but it's by no means a done deal. In fact, we've had a conversation just this week with the working group around, and Warren, please jump in here, but the regional deal proposals are intended to be very light touch. There is not intended to be a huge amount of work and detail around them. We have heard from Rod Drury and Ross Copeland that they would like more detail to be put into the package, which just isn't simply available right now, such as where routes might go and things like that, because obviously there's been no engagement with the communities, no consents or anything have been lodged for where you might build these things. So there's a whole way to go before anything gets locked in. If that helps, Neil or Mark?
Yeah, it kind of does, but all I can say is that I don't like the idea of being in partnership with someone when they're not telling the other side of the party they want to be in partnership with what they're doing, and that's just not helpful.
Yeah.
Well, I think we're the only council that that's happened to in the last week.
Well,
so.
Queenstown can do their done shit in their own batch and not include us.
And Dylan, what concerns me is as elected members, have we given any staff a brief to actually investigate the alternative sites for hospitals in our district?
No. So I guess we've been working on the project with Helen Foot, which Tamer is a part of, around healthcare opportunities, and that's a networked approach. So this is not talking about a single hospital in Queenstown. Tamer, you might want to.
Sits outside of the regional deal conversations that I have been a part of so far, but sits with the work that Tim was doing with Glenn and the MPs around the health sector. And those were kind of progressing as two separate streams of work and now have somewhat collided. But I wouldn't have said that there was any indication from us as elected members to investigate any of those. We're right at the very beginning of the regional deal discussion, which is why we're having this workshop now, recognising that the time frame is very constrained for when we have to have it in. So far, all the council has agreed to is, yes, we would like to be thinking about putting together a regional deal with QLDC and ORC, and there hasn't been any decisions made as to what might be going in that.
I think everybody needs to read that article on the ADT this morning, because it is quite scary, because when our ratepayers start reading that, it sounds like it's a done deal. It sounds like we're privatising delivery of medical services. And it definitely sounds like it's a done deal.
It's not a done deal when we haven't had any deals,
No, I know.
and that's what we're talking about today. Yeah.
But then it's just very odd that we're sitting down having a workshop which we haven't even discussed provisions of health services, and there's an article in today's paper basically saying it's a done deal.
Right, for
Something's
absolute
amiss.
clarity for anyone who may be listening to this now or in the future, there is no done deal around healthcare that relates to a regional deal. Tracy, you might want to jump in as well. There's a whole phase in here, and we actually got this in this presentation, around what the proposal timeline looks like, and then negotiation, and then a final deal. Even if CODC and QLDC were chosen to be the first cab off the rank, I suspect it would not be until very late this year that there would be any deal signed off. Tracy, I don't know if you want to touch on what that timeline looks like.
Yes, that's so very much what was asked was the submission of an indication of interest, and that was what you put in on the 18th of December, which is that you're going to put in the proposal, and it was after an expression there of what potential areas there might be, but there was no assumption that that's actually going to be about these 5 projects that you'll be looking to do as part of the regional deal. That information is due at the end of February, and so it's really just an expression of interest that you're going to put one in, some definitive areas of what you might look at, but the actual projects and the areas will be refined and worked through and submitted at the end of February.
Thanks, Tracy. So yeah, we are very much at literally the beginning of this process, well away from any deals being done. If that helps put you at ease, Martin, despite what may be in the media.
I'm sure someone will put me and Lewis in this place and tell me to concentrate on this shit.
I'm completely lost. Because if you take, and I haven't read, because I was out early this morning chasing sheep, so I haven't read any papers.
Did you catch one?
No. But as I sit on the Otago Regional Roading Authority, which takes in the Waitaki, Queenstown District, Central Otago District, South Otago, and Otago Southern, there's been no discussions regarding, if you're talking about the carriageway between Queenstown. So why would that not be a part of the discussion we should be having at that level before it becomes discussed in the paper, if it is? There has been comments about it, that down through the power cable from the Queenstown Airport, you're booking at your hotel, but surely it would be at that level where you had a regional deal from Waitaki to Bluff. Why does it now be a surprise that something's happening that we don't know about? Because that's at the level you'd think those discussions will be had before we brought them back to this table or to Queenstown Lakes.
I think it's more that those guys are saying that in the article it's saying that it's already a done deal.
Yeah, but I guess how did they get the interest in the article and it hasn't even come to us at the level we're at, a regional file, regional group?
I think it's because there's other things that have been happening in the background over a number of years, especially in the Queenstown area, that they've been putting a lot of work into all their different projects that they have running. Here's an opportunity for a regional deal, which includes potentially bringing us and Civil, quite a bit of work with ORC, into part of that deal. So they're already I guess, further advanced with some of the projects that they would love to see. This is our opportunity to talk about what projects we might want to be a part of, if we want to be a part of this, and then kind of nut out some of what that might look like today, with the ability to ask questions of specialists from DIA as to what that means for us as a council. So Queenstown could put out, I would like to see A to J, and we might say, well, kind of we align with 4 of those, so let's pursue those 4. So nothing has been said. Yes, we're going to go ahead with this. This council has given no indication that we are any part of a regional deal where we're going to build Queenstown in a gondola. That's not where we're at. And while that may have been what's ordered,
Our role today is to deal with the government to find out how far down Queenstown are with LRC. Are they down there?
today is to hear from Dylan. The partnership stuff.
So,
And where might we?
So have they already got their list?
No.
Their list?
no,
No.
Queenstown, Queenstown and the government have got their.
No, Queenstown, and look, this is Ross Copeland, so this is a private individual, private business. They have some thoughts, Queenstown have some thoughts, and they've done a lot of work, but no one's, this still is not yet pitched to government, and this is why we've got until the end of this month to come up with a coherent sort of application that reflects all the partners and councils, mana whenua, and private interests as well. And they try and weave that together on what we think the priorities are for this greater region. But, they've just pulled out a couple of examples. This is a regional deal. It would need all parties to sign up here.
So they're driving it basically. They're driving the bus and we're standing at the bus shelter.
They've done a chunk of work ahead of us. But because the government are saying it is a regional deal, it is not a council deal, but they need regional partners, us, ORC. And so you'll see the themes around transportation and all those sorts of things reflect perhaps the wider needs of the.
So what's the deadline, Peter?
Well, we have to submit by the end of 28th of February.
So
This is the city.
so yeah, just to put I guess your point there at ease, Stu. This is a regional deal. There is no regional deal without CODC in this conversation and being happy with what is being put forward in the proposal. You as the decision makers will be given that opportunity to sign off on whatever that regional deal proposal is in your meeting late in February before it is then submitted to government. So you will cite this before it goes anywhere.
one thing that has been biting at my head over the whole Christmas period, and we're talking about the water and amalgamating water services. I guess now we've got the government effectively in our room. It feels like there's a real voluntary or a push, and regional deals are probably a classic way of doing it, for a voluntary amalgamation. And if it's a soft way of saying we should be looking at amalgamating a lot more services, which I have no problem with, to be fair, we should be looking at Waitaki as a regional, we're not big enough to be what we are. Is that not how we should be having our thinking, or how the government should be telling us how they're thinking? Because effectively, if we have a scattergun approach, when actually the real outcome, this end of the table thinks we should be bigger than we are, and we're all sitting here chipping away quietly, because really, whether you look at health, it is a regional deal. Roading, whether you like it or not, I'll just quickly shot through a thing there. There's no money south of Ashburton from Transit New Zealand for any major work other than safety work in the Homer Tunnel, because we're not big enough. And that meeting we had about 10 minutes with the Prime Minister, I don't want any deals about your bridges unless they're from Timaru South. So if we're looking down regional deals and we're looking at urban growth and bits and pieces, are we not better looking at amalgamation and having that discussion, or bringing it forward if it does happen over 10 years? Because a voluntary, what we're talking about with a water entity is actually amalgamating voluntary without the government legislating us into it, for water entities to do it. So why should we be having those conversations? Do we need a mayor in Queenstown, Balclutha and Alexandra? Do we need 5 CEOs chucked into things? Now we're going to put water on top of it.
I feel like we're not gonna solve that in the.
Well, I mean, is this just something that blow? That's what I'm saying.
Warren, did you want to answer?
Yeah, before I do, I'll on that, but, I'll basically just, reiterate what Peter and Dylan have said around the priorities and start session we had around health services. To be absolutely clear, CODC, ORC and QLDC, are partners, partnering up, come forward with a proposal. There will be 5 priorities that you will, identify by February 28th. But the detail doesn't need to be there, but it's going to be continuing with the budget out further. But those 5 priorities are for you to decide as a group. Now, you already said we've been doing a lot of work. They have some thoughts on what they might be. CODC has thoughts on possible priorities to put into that group of 5. You all need to collectively decide what that is. So that's your decision to make. To be absolutely clear about that. Coming to the question of amalgamation, one of the criteria for consideration in terms of any proposals that come forward to government for regional renewal to be free will be aligned with the local water done well program. So what we're looking at there is making use of the tools. So there's no view on amalgamation that government holds. Shared services and that sort of consideration is part of the local water done well and financial sustainability. So it's a concept we're having. We'll discuss that further. My colleague Marlon will be here to talk through that. But it's about use of those tools and the optimal arrangement for your community, and whether that includes grouping up shared services or CCO structure. Again, all decisions to be made by you as you'll be leaders of this district and part of the regional conversation. So government does not have a view on what the best outcome is. That's for you to decide. Government's making the tools available through the legislation, and we'll be looking at whether those tools are being used. And if the view is that no, and that's not producing the best arrangement, then yeah, that will be a consideration for the regional deals. But no further than that, and no predetermined views to what this arrangement is. I hope that's clear.
Thank you.
Thanks, Warren.
Is there anything else that people want to cover off before Dylan gets into the next part? Oh, right, Dylan.
Okay, thanks, Tamer. Peter, sorry, I was just wondering if maybe you just want to spend 2 minutes just speaking about the Wellington Regional Growth Partnership and how that's functioned and why we see that being an opportunity we would like to put forward to councillors for CODC to join the Queenstowner.
Yeah, so the Wellington Regional Leadership Group was a group that was put together by the mayors, Mana Whenua partners, and ministers of the Crown were part of it. And part of the reason was because under the requirements of the previous government was Tier 1 cities had to produce spatial plans for the region. And so it needed a mechanism whereby the mayors could agree that process and work their way through creating a regional spatial plan. And so the Wellington Regional Leadership Group was created. It was created as a joint committee. It delegated decision-making rights, and it had an independent chair, Tracy Martin. And the areas of focus was obviously on the spatial plan, regional economic development, and I can walk on over in there, which just slips my mind at the moment. But equally, it had very similar themes in terms of what you see in the Grow Well Fire Order, and with aspirations around housing, supply, resilient infrastructure, economic growth. The spatial plan had to be able to unlock, reflect those aspirations, as well as they were sort of separate work streams. Regional economic growth was worked on, the strategy was worked on by John Allen as Wellington NZ. So it was a really good framework to bring mayors together with decision-making rights as a collective, as one mayor, one vote, Mana Whenua partners, as well as ministers of the Crown on those big issues, to get agreement on the lay down of the future growth of the region. And so it was able to accommodate the tier one cities, you know, everyone on the south side of the Rimutakas, Wellington City, Hutt City, Upper Hutt, Porirua, as well as the three rural communities, South Wairarapa, Casterton and Masterton, and then extending up to Kapiti and Horowhenua. And so it was a good mechanism to agree on regional, how the region can advance together with a coherent plan. It was consensus, and Tracy Martin was the first independent chair. And look, I actually think they did a pretty good job in bringing that all together, because prior to that, the region was a bit of a basket case in trying to come up with a unified position on how they see growth happening across the region, how they see where should we focus on industrial areas, because in the past you would have individual mayors pitching their particular cases. So what would happen is you try and go to government with a coherent plan, but all 10 mayors would have a different view. And so the government said, go away until you can speak as one voice and come back to us with a coherent strategy that unlocks the region. We're not interested in talking to you. So it really was a forcing mechanism for the region to get its thoughts together. Equally now, with the growth we're seeing in these combined districts and the impact and the influence of the ORC around transportation and all that sort of stuff, going forward, this collective region needs to have a view and a shared consensus on how it sees growth occurring. So it's not ad hoc, and it's well thought through. This mechanism, the Grow Well Fire Order, the regional deals, this is part of that process. And so I would imagine any governance arrangements around that would be not too dissimilar to what was created in the Wellington region, where mayors and other key partners sit around the table with ministers of the Crown and agree the strategy and how we're going to unlock growth in this region. And so I thought Wellington was a good example of how tier one cities and rural communities come together and it at least lay down how they think growth should occur in a managed way, but we all benefit and we all get the uplift.
But there's a fine, but circumstances of Queenstown, anyone else are quite different. I mean, and you can see it in the talk that's been. People would be fishing around trying to get to Africa, have a regional entity in Vienna. People think the territorial authorities being lifted. It's not the same territorial authorities that would be part of some kind of regional plan.
Yeah, I've been granted. I mean, water's an example, isn't it? At the moment, the partnership looking forward for water doesn't really include QLDC because they have a slightly different view on that. But generally, the same issues: economic growth, resilient infrastructure.
Good morning. This is a final warning call for customers.
They are consistent across the region. They just might be at slightly different relative scales, but you know.
You're getting into you are getting into the areas of aspiration. Really, we've got a government sitting there telling us stick to your knitting, stick to your three waters, stick to your transport and your basic facilities, and when you start talking about spatial plans and economic growth, you're talking about council territorial authorities having a different role.
Not so much a bigger role, but, you know, it's making sure that our spatial plans accommodate growth out for the next 30, 40 years. But obviously, the government is a key player in this, whether they're not going to stump up with money, but the policies and the things that they do, like, you know, QLDC, they want a visitor levy. That is not our gift to give, that is the government's gift to give. That requires us to sit around the table with ministers of the Crown. We would like a share of the Crown royalties for mining, because on current plans, that's $330 million in Crown royalties on Santana Minerals. The only way we're going to have that discussion with council, with the government, is if we are, as a united region, in this case a sub-region, and we can articulate our case why we think that's important. Because I can tell you now, if both Taylor and I go up to the Minister of Local Government and knock on the door and say we want access to the Crown royalties, he'll tell us to piss off And I need a more coherent response from your region, not individual councils knocking on my door. This is the mechanism to enable
Yeah.
So,
If I could just add as well, and look, we are planning on having a joint council workshop between QLDC, ORC and yourselves. So there could be a couple of questions in there that you might want to ask of the likes of Mayor Lewis. But what I've experienced by sitting in on the recent Grow Wild Water partnership is, as I said earlier, the challenges that Queenstown is raising in that partnership are the same challenges we have. They are just happening faster to Queenstown or on a bigger scale. So for me, I see significant opportunity for us to be able to learn and partner with Queenstown on a number of those challenges, because they are not different for us.
Do you want to go to your next bit, Dylan, and we'll?
Yeah. Okay,
You get
cool. Okay, so what are regional deals? Look, we've kind of touched on this already. Primarily, so it's a 30-year vision. They'll have a 10-year strategic plan. It's obviously about long-term intent. It is about things that we're already looking at and considering. So this isn't dream up new fancy toys. This is what have we already got in different plans for ourselves or for Queenstown or for ORC or for Ngāi Tahu that can all come together and be part of a regional deal. So it's not just dreaming up new ideas. The focus or the priority objectives are around building economic growth, delivering connected and resilient infrastructure, and improving the supply of affordable quality housing. And so, as you'll see when we touch on these different packages, we've highlighted which of those priority objectives they touch on. Of course, many touch on multiple, but you'll start to get a sense of what they feel like. Funding, financing, regulatory relief. The primary piece here, I suppose, is there is no money that comes from central government for regional deals. So this is not put your hand out and there'll be some money coming. This is about what are the mechanisms that central government can assist local government and along with private sector investment to unlock opportunities in the regions. So whether that's funding and financing tools, whether that's regulatory relief, using existing fundings in a different way, or improving that coordination between central government agencies to support things that are needed in the regions. Warren or Tracy, I mean, this is really probably your area of expertise. Anything you want to add to that one?
No, I think you captured it really well, Dylan. I would just say that in terms of the objectives for building economic growth and
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, Eva Zealand and the Star Alliance would like
and I think it's really important that any of the projects and initiatives we're putting forward are linked into those kind of objectives.
events at
Great,
Gate 2.
thank you. I'm just waiting for that announcement to finish. Right, we're back. Thanks, Tracy. So here are the timelines, and as we said, really compressed short timelines here. So there's obviously been a bunch of work going on prior. We're now having this workshop or briefing today. Next week, I'll give you any update at your council meeting. If we've got anything to do, then there'll be an online session for all councillors on the afternoon of 5th of February. An invite will come out for that shortly. The 12th of February, we're planning an in-person meeting of councillors. That will be in the morning of the 12th of February, likely to be in Alexandra, between about 9 and 11, I think was the time we're proposing. And then we move into the papers needing to be finalised, because they obviously start hitting meeting schedules. So the first council to meet and decide will be ORC. Then it will be QLDC the day before us, and then ourselves on the 26th of February, with the proposal submitted on the 28th of February. So as you can see, pretty compressed timelines. Over on the central government side, you can see those milestones that I referred to earlier. So we're moving towards milestone 2 now. with milestone 3 and 4 coming later in the year.
Dylan,
Yes.
again, are you confident that those 3 dates, 25, or 19, 25, 26, that there's anything that comes from left field that there'll be time to sort it? Or you really will be far enough, so there'll be nothing from left field come out?
We are hopeful, I suppose, over this next few weeks that we'll be working closely with yourselves as the governors to make sure that any major changes that come through, we're keeping you abreast of. And so by the time we get to those meetings, you should be pretty comfortable with what you're citing already. That's the intent.
Yeah, okay. So obviously everybody's aware it's going to be tight.
Yes. Remembering, these are light touch proposals. So this won't go into deep detail by any means. And as you can see, milestone 3 and particularly milestone 4, that's actually the point where we'll start getting into the negotiating detail. And if there's a point in there where actually CODC goes, hang on, that's not what we thought this was, then we don't have to sign up to the deal. So there's still opportunities to raise the flag.
No, because has there been any talk through or talk about if the regional people were established, how that would be run and administered? Is there going to be a separate secretariat within the local authorities, or?
At this stage, no, and it's probably a conversation we need to have, not just about regional deals, but also about the Grow Wildfire partnership, because at the moment that's QLDC doing both the secretariat work for both, and I think that's a conversation we do need to have. We haven't had that conversation as yet.
Because something I say, you've just got three authorities, and you're going to establish another layer, not joining those authorities together, just establishing something else. It's going to require either separate staff or a separate secretariat, or just another, so it's just another, another layer of bureaucracy.
Yeah.
Just in terms of the touch meeting due at the end of February, I think they just asked for an indication of how potentially governance might be managed. And again, that's just at a very high level, an indication of how you think might the different regional and regional authorities, how they will work together.
And just on the secretariat type function, obviously the Wellington Regional Leadership Group did need one, but that was 4 staff, a director and 3 staff. It was funded through a regional rate of the participating councils and collected by the regional council. And but the working groups and the staff actually came from the greater, the council staff themselves were the ones who contributed the main bulk of the work. It just had a very small team sitting over the top.
Sorry, Dylan, if you're not talking, you might have to put yourself on mute. You've got a noise in your background.
No worries.
Thank you.
If I just add, if we're putting an application in through the Grow Well, the Urban Growth Partnership, there'll be some existing mechanisms in place there, and then obviously how they accommodate Secretary of District Council as part of that needs to be indicated, but we're not expecting a lot of depth and detail as to how it's going to work in practice, and we'll just in a bit of an outline
No,
at this stage.
And look, the intention is to leverage the existing staff within the respective councils, accepting though that there might be something that we need just 1 or 2 who sit over the top of it to run the process. But the rest of us, the planning side, the economic development side, the infrastructure side, we will be a part of that. So the work will be done by individual councils as they build it up. So it's not creating another sort of mini council sitting out there in the ether. It is to be predominantly staffed by current staff.
So this is not just urban economic growth, correct? And I would argue that 86% of our GDP in the rural part of that comes from agriculture, which is irrigation. And in one of those, what Neil brought up, a very valid point, that if we had in the proposal, and the proposal is that Falls Dam, like it was nearly fast tracked, will come to there, and the staff in the LRC are against the idea, which they have been for the last 6 years, of irrigation being or economic growth or dairy farming or development of viticulture, then you end up fighting the same people that the industry's been fighting for the last 6 or 7 years to try to get agriculture or growth. Because if you wanted to economic growth and you put more cherries and Cromwell and more fruit and more irrigation and gold mining, you'd have economic growth in the level, but it's not going to be, when you look at the list on the funding regulatory relief, it's all about schools, hospitals, aspects of growth in the region, and the road user charges, get to targeted rates, told, all those other, yes, I can understand, which only really affects Queenstown. But the economic drivers of Central Otago in the last 100 years, 120 years, has been agriculturally based. But the worrying part is you're not having representative, unless it's Tracy and I, at that part for rural economic growth.
I'll make a comment on that and probably speak at a school a little bit, but just to let you know on some of the politics. Back in Wellington, the minister examined its requirement of all proposals, that regional council was a part of all proposals. The reason behind that is that the minister wanted to ensure that the regional council has a skin on the game. So they come forward with a proposal, the assumption that the regional council, as they're part of that partnership, are committing to making those 5 priorities that, happen. So that's a very intentional outcome.
So that they're mandated to be driven to economic growth of the region rather than a regulatory role. So they have to change their mindset.
That's right, but they're doing in the context of priorities they're committed to as a partner to a regional deal. And, you have a reasonable expectation that they will perform their role consistent with that desired outcome, which I put their name to. And the minister was, speaking to hold them to that.
It's a target, why don't you be doing that?
Well, I guess the same point is the government are nearly in there with a stick, with the cattle prod saying you've got to start towing the line and we'll put a facilitator in, and yet we've got to be dealing with the same issue that possibly the government's having.
Yeah, I guess politically they see it slightly differently in that it was at their discretion, they signed up to it. So that's the decision the regional council made as part of the wider group. And in doing so, they are committing to realise that ambition.
Yeah. and-
Falls Dam has been raised.
Yeah.
Falls Dam has been raised as a potential priority for this council with the chief executive and the chair of ORC.
And look, when you look at one of the 3 pillars, economic growth, and then you look at in some of the documentation, increasing productivity through economic resilience, we could easily make a case for irrigation and water under that. So I don't think our voice will be lost on this. I think there's words here that we can add our piece to this, that we make sure it gets elevated as one of the partners.
And can I just add, that's exactly why we're having this conversation right now, because if we're hearing from you as the elected members, hang on, there's a piece in here that we've missed around agriculture or the raising of Falls Dam or whatever that point might be, well, then we bring it in. So that's exactly why we want to have this conversation today. I'll just move. So that's the timeline. It's pretty compressed, but you've heard the reasons why and how we're going to manage that. Sorry. So what are the packages? So again, we're here. This is using the Queenstown template. So you'll notice probably a bit more Queenstown colour to this than you'll notice ours, but that's fine. We're working on that. So you'll see there's essentially 8 packages that have been put in here that align to the 3 priority areas. Now, some of them, of course, cross over, and I'll go through these not in any particular order, but probably more the ones that have had a little bit more work put into them. There are a number towards the latter end that haven't had as much work put into them, and possibly are starting to be realised they may not be the priorities, but we'll work through that. So, first one, transforming the transport system. Now, this is probably the main one that concerns ORC, because ORC are obviously the provider of public transport. So, we've already heard and we've already discussed what it might look like from a Queenstown perspective with gondola, or some kind of system of mass rapid transport to move people around Queenstown, relieving pressure particularly on Franklin Road. That's going to have an indirect benefit to Central Otago, because we know if you're a resident of Central Otago trying to get into the Queenstown CBD, we know that's not great. Equally, you also know visitors who come here are going to be impacted by that experience as well. So anything that can relieve some of those transport pressures into Central Queenstown will have an indirect benefit to Central Otago. The benefit piece for Central Otago that we're really talking about, and this is already in ORC's annual plan, is looking at some form of public transport by road connecting Alexandra and Cromwell to Wanaka and Queenstown. And that's the piece for us that it starts to obviously have a significant change. That's helping workers get to jobs. That's also helping people get to healthcare and move around the region who may not have access to vehicles. So I guess from a CODC point of view, that's the one that we've zoned in on as a piece of interest for us. Thoughts, questions, councillors?
So with the Terrace Airport being sitting there as a jurisdiction, when you talk about those issues, has that become a joint discussion that council could be involved in for a 30-year plan of transportation within the region? Is that one of the things that you could put on a deal? And if you did put it into a deal, you would have serious opposition from the Queenstown Lakes, the benefit to Central Otago or some parts of Queenstown Lakes, Dunedin City Council and Christchurch City Council. I mean, is that one thing that, how do we get that on a regional deal?
I'm not sure these. Oh, sorry.
Until that comes forward from I mean, at the moment, they're just farming 750 hectares of land.
Yeah, but I guess there's a point going, that isn't something to look at transport infrastructure, and I get that. I've been sitting on those authorities for a while. There's an appetite from one group to look at airports. So it's not going to go away if it's owned by another council, but is that something and go, well, do people in the back of their mind go, let's put it on the economic deal and have a look at the benefits or cost analysis or whatever? I mean, is that one of them? It's a big ticket item.
Yeah, so I think we can only work with, and this is in the framework, right? We can only work with what's in the plans. So it's an idea at the moment. It's not gone beyond that right now. So whilst obviously if that were to come further forward, that would have to be addressed, and we would have to figure out what that might look like from a regional perspective. At this stage, there is nothing that's been put in front of us so here it is, this is going into your spatial plan and wherever. So at the moment, we can't really work with it. If it comes in, that changes, of course.
Yes.
No, we're talking about a public transport policy. How much of our budget at the moment is spent on subsidising public transport? Hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And I'll give you the figures. And if you want to start looking at a public transport to Alexandra and Wanaka and Cromwell, you're automatically talking about increased taxes to subsidise public transport. Well, it's just throughout the region. And you just on pure factual terms.
Yeah, so
the point, I speak to know what we've done to see what the need is for public transport to be improved between the Cromwell and Dunn and Wanaka and Queenstown. So it was just an aspirational goal. It sounds good because public transport is the ideological flavour of the month, but when you look at the cost of it, it's prohibitive.
Can I make a suggestion around the transport idea? If you're in Central Otago and you're thinking about transport in Queenstown, your biggest issue is getting resilient through the Kawara board when you're not being held up regularly at the flood, and getting from Lake Hayes to Frankton. And this is all focused around Frankton into Central Queenstown. A lot of the people who commute backwards and forwards between our districts will work in that, don't go into Central Queenstown. So if you want to look at this from a Central Otago selfish perspective and say, what do we want out of this? if there's a thing around transport, you're probably wanting to say, well, we want a resilient corridor through to Queenstown that's not regularly shut down with delays, and you want to be able to get through to Frankton, because we need to be able to get to the airport. We need people who work in all those subdivisions, and in those subdivisions to be able to get backwards and forwards through the port. You know,
And that's it.
Yeah. So, sorry, can I just jump in?
I think it's a little bit unfortunate, Dylan, that this is so QLDC centric, because we're looking at it as though this is what is in play, and this is not. This is the start of a discussion document. What would COGC want to see in this? And part of that for us is moving our workforce around the area. It's moving our people for medical appointments who can't drive to Queenstown. For example, Queenstown people come to Dunstan Hospital for care and not drive. It's not about getting traffic down and in and out of Frankton, which is what this slide is focused on. So if we don't focus on the aspects of public transport that we would like to see, and I've had a lot of feedback that businesses and individuals are interested in a link that would allow people to from Alex to the airport in Queenstown using a public service, for example, for staff to be able to travel between Cromwell and Alex. It's not going to be a every 7 minutes bus service, but what would we want to see? What would be our priorities? Would we want to see a 3 times a day bus service between Alex and Kmart or whatever it be, because everybody loves a bargain at Kmart? I don't want us to focus on what's in these slides. I think that that's not accurate of what we're talking about for our regional deal that we are a part of. So what are our ideas that we would want to see aside from what Queenstown?
Can I also just add, you're looking at version 1 because version 1 is the only slides that are currently available. There is notes that come from more recent meetings around prioritising the Kawara Gorge as a priority route to improve resilience on that road. So Julie touched on your point just before. Nigel, coming back to your point, look, yes, public transport's aspirational. This is a 30-year plan. We know we're going to have significant growth in both Cromwell and Alexandra. So it might not be that public transport is here next year or even in the next 5 years, but it is part of the thinking longer term. Funding it, we've already had some conversations, I know, well, Queenstown and ORC have had conversations, I should say, with private sector interests about them subsidising some form of public transport to help get their people to work. So there are
conversations as well, Dylan, with local business owners who would be willing to contribute to something that enabled them to move their workforce.
Just to give you an idea for Nigel, the Otago Regional Council funding allocation for public transport operations was 98,857,000 allocated, and they got 94,700. And you'd argue we haven't got an efficient public transport system, and the OLC is spending 100 million a year. That was in our last committee meeting, 24 September. So there's a lot of issues, and maybe that's where we should be looking and saying, well, some of that 100 million over 3 years could be looking at some of these issues, and is it being spent over transport? 100 million. I guess that 98,987,000 with 3-year project. 3 years. 3 years. So, you know, that may be just the allocation of that money in the regional deals are better than what it is in Dunedin, and that's only in Otago. And the Cargill got theirs and they're less.
Sorry, we've got a monthly phone, and Julie's point is right. Resilience through the road transport corridors is easily the most important thing.
Yeah. Is there anything else aside from resilience in the Kawara Gorge and also, I guess, to a lesser extent?
So I think, you know, it's really difficult to get to Frankton at times. So the shot over, so my understanding from the regional deals is the government's not going to hand out, here's a whole heap of money for the region, but what they will do is they will look at the programs they've already got and where things sit in the priority system. So Stu's right, the Land Transport Committee says we want these things done, and the government looks at the NZTA funding program and says, well, you can have this cut of the pie. This is your opportunity to maybe leverage a bigger cut of the pie around some priorities. And that shot over bridge is in NZTA's program, but it's way down the list. It needs to come up the list.
So
go back to,
can I just stress?
So this is quite important because there's no funding south of Ashburton. And the moment, one of the massive runs from Transit New Zealand is actually resilience on the infrastructure, which is basically from Dunedin or Palmerston to Oamaru. So a lot of that allocation, if it takes 25 more minutes to get to the airport, they're not caring if you lose a bridge in Oamaru, you lose a railway network, you lose the infrastructure, and you've got seabed coming into Meraki where they could lose the state highway. So they're resilience now, and the only issue they had, the only funding model they had was safety work around the Homer Tunnel and some of the work into Te Anau.
Well, that's why this regional deal would give us the ability to, I guess,
Make a case.
make a
But
case.
we're making that at this level with Transit New Zealand. So that's the point. The Target, this committee, Target Southern Regional Transport Committee, are making these allocations or active applications to the government anyway.
I know, but you're quite right, with the people are lobbying and groups are out there doing it and form groups. But this perhaps provides a more coherent argument for why investment, why government needs to, NZTA may need to come to the party, accelerate the advance of the Shotover Bridge, because here's the fact, unlocking economic resilience, infrastructure resilience, what this creates, unlocks for this region, by sort of multiplying. And so I'm not saying that that voice of that committee is not important, but I think this is the mechanism to go directly with ministers who are sitting around that table making that decision.
Yeah, and I'm arguing the point that this group is that group you're talking about now.
Yeah, but there's also a regional committee for every other region that's also making the same argument.
Yeah.
This process gives you an extra on top of that, Stu.
Dylan, did you want to cover something else?
Yeah, I just want to stress that this is about going into a partnership, and this is about having a conversation with our partners, which one of them is central government, and about going, well, hang on, we don't think you've got your priorities right or your allocations right. This is an opportunity for us to go into that conversation with our central government partners, whether that be NZTA, whether that be Ministry of Education, Health, whatever it might be, and say, hang on, this is our reasons why you need to be investing in these. So the ideas are great, and that's awesome. Let's keep those ideas coming, but let's also not try and point holes in what's not working right now, because this is our opportunity to try and make the improvements we're trying to achieve. And I'm also quite wary we're on point 1 of 8.
Yeah, do you want to get to the next one, Don?
Yeah, let's move forward. Securing energy needs for the future. Once again, so this is version 1. Now we won't really worry too much about what's on there from a Queenstown perspective right now. And we know there's plans from the world of Aurora around how they're going to develop greater resilience in their lines, particularly Cromwell and the Wanaka end. A piece that has emerged really only on Tuesday in any great detail is a conversation around working with government around developing a package to encourage more uptake of residential solar, so solar and battery, to then encourage obviously more resilience from people to have their own supply of power, which will take pressure out of the public sector lines as well. As we know, the growth in the region, we're going to start hitting a point where there's going to have to be significant investment from Transpower and others in this part of the region just to keep servicing what's coming. So if we can encourage the uptake of more residential solar, that may push out that timeline for that large-scale investment. What that package looks like and how that incentive scheme works, there's no detail around. It is a conversation that Rewiring Aotearoa have kind of picked up, and they're keen to have a conversation with us as part of the package.
Aside from that, potential pilot project or something, and it may well be like they used to have the funds that you could get if you were insulating into the floor of your house.
Exactly that. Yeah.
It might be a program like that, whereby if you're putting on solar, you get some assistance in some way, shape or form. Is there anything else that you think that we should be looking at for the energy sector for this area? I'm looking at you, Neil.
I think there should be a focus also on infrastructure. So, councils are a good example of the high users, and where they can look at the same sort of options. So residential is great, but actually looking at the bigger users as well. Because that's where, you know, in terms of the network and all those, a lot of the peaks come from. So working ways to do that. I'm not saying that's not picked up as part of that, but the focus is your residential, that's great. But actually, it's probably the business opportunity to you know, swimming pools, you know, ice skating rinks, all those sort of things, and making sure that those sort of things turn out to be better, because that'll make a big difference, actually, ultimately in the power.
So ECA, are able to provide licenses. It's quite hard sometimes to get yourself into that, so it would be good if ECA could have a bit of focus on this.
So, Neil, I think actually your point around encouraging businesses is a great one, and not one that's obviously come up in the conversation, but I don't see why we wouldn't just loop that into the same piece around, if you're looking at some kind of residential scheme, why wouldn't you develop some kind of commercial or corporate scheme?
And that's what Julie is highlighting as well, Dylan, that it would be helpful if ECA were on board to maybe be a wee bit more acceptable.
They're likely to be a delivery partner, right? But we don't know who exactly that might be. That's further down the line.
And even to the extent of looking at when there's subdivisions, the other one on Padmont at the moment, with Otago one, you know, looking at opportunities to say what can they put in there that could be, you know, that collective, if you like, for want of a better word, options for that.
Yeah. I totally agree as well, and I think we've been seeing our power bill go up so much with our water treatment plants as well, and you know they're so expensive to run, and I think we should be looking at ways that we can reduce our energy costs for sure.
Yeah. Especially that's sort of the infrastructure, which is one of the drivers. So it's, you know.
And that's one, if you're going to legislate anything, legislate the power requirements of services for councils or.
It seems like a no-brainer to have everyone who can have power.
It's a no-brainer. It's a pretty simple formula about capital expenditure for solar and the payback period. And I imagine that the payback period is coming down, but I imagine it's still, you know, one hand you've got affordable housing, start legislating and putting laws in and saying you've got to put in provisions for solar housing in your building. For solar, the prices, and if it makes economic sense, if the payback period is 3 or 4 or 5 years, fine. It's still 6 or 7 or 8, it's supporting yourself, really.
But there's another component to that. We've got a quote on the table of 150,000 solar in to drive irrigation pumps. And the power company won't accept the power, they'll only accept what we use. So if we want to be a net contributor to energy, Pioneer or the Target Power or whatever, they will not accept the power.
Yeah, because they can't have it back to the grid.
Well, that's what you've got. Yeah, but when they go and put their proposal, the power company say, no, you're not picking up the power. So we're actually fighting your intention. Then you go to the bank and get a 1% loan, economically, well, we've done.
Tracy, have you got anything that you wanted to add on the energy sector stuff in relation to regional news?
I think that would be really supporting new ministers transport, following just mainland.
Yeah.
Always constantly having the Tracy's point at the start of this conversation, tying it back to economic growth and translating all these initiatives into GDP regionally is an important thing. So remind that much.
Probably the one that does pick up in here is that energy in terms of production of energy.
Yeah.
So you get a connection back into the likes of the project to replace Raise Falls Dam, and there's other irrigation dams around this network where they're not flash in no small way. So I think that's the other one too, is that to pick up on that. Falls Dams is the obvious example. You know, produced here, that all had benefits by that as well. I might have biased towards that stuff.
And I think that's energy is one of the biggest hamstrings in this council as well. The cost of energy is too dear to produce the products, and we've been driven that way with the carbon side, you know, heat pumps, and like it's not something wrong, but it's a massive cost on GDP, especially when you've got the viticulture and horticulture industry that rely so heavily on frost fighting and all that. It's one of the major ones that we should be in a regional deal, would be affecting Queensland as much as anyone.
Okay, shall we move to the next?
Which I could maybe somewhat complicated, but do you just want to give the overview of health, and maybe if people don't look at that particular slide, because I don't know that that's really what we're talking about, so we just, health, don't look at the slide.
Ignore the slide. That's version 1, right? As we've discussed, these continue to update. So health is, I guess, where we're looking at with health is around this networked approach, which is what Helen Foote has been working with, and Payne has been part of that, and Tim was prior. So this is looking at a way that can there be a way that the public and private sectors work together to support one another, meaning that we have specialist services in different areas of the entire inland Otago region. So there could be some special services at Clyde and in Cromwell, and there could be some special services in Wanaka, and there could be some special services in Queenstown. That's essentially how it would work. There, as you already know, there are some private providers in the area already. There are others that are looking at developments of private sector, but is there an opportunity for public services to be delivered at those sites as well, and in a partnership model, which is a model that is used commonly around Australia, and something that Helen is doing further work on exploring at the moment. Tamer, you probably have some more detail if you want to add to that.
Yes, only a little bit, because I've only been in this group for the last sort of couple of months after Tim stepping down. Dylan, you might just need to mute again, sorry.
Sorry.
And I'm meeting with Helen again on Friday. They were sort of progressing some work, and I don't know where they're going to be at now that there is a new Minister of Health. And I'm a little bit worried that some of that work that has already been done might be back to square one. I don't know how long it will take to brief the new minister on what has been happening, obviously quite a lot in the health space around the country. And I don't know how high up the priority list that briefing will be for him on what is happening here. A lot of the work is around if there are, I guess, at a high level, if there are private facilities coming to our region, and in particular Queenstown's region anyway, is there any ability for our public to get a better service or better access to service and a more equitable service by leveraging some of that private stuff to also cover public stuff? There hasn't been a lot of detail as to what that might look like, but some of the, as Dylan said, some of it may well be specialist services in each area that involves going to Dunstan for one thing and to Wanaka for something else, as opposed to hauling through to Dunedin for a 15-minute appointment. I would anticipate that that would be alongside of the improvements made at Dunedin Hospital, not instead of, and the growth in numbers in this area in Queenstown does seem to have attracted attention further up the chain at the ministry and within government as to a recognition of how many people are now in this area on any given day compared to other locations in the south, and the distance travelled for both, you know, standard routine care and also critical care. So I think that maybe what has been done in this space before may not be where we're at now. You guys have all had that kind of one-page slide update that came from Helen. I will find out on Friday if there is some additional information that can come from that in terms of what's in the article from the ODT. I don't think that that is necessarily any impact on us at this stage. I guess for us it would be, are we willing to continue this conversation? We're not making any decisions today in the workshop, but in terms of what our priorities are, is health, whatever that looks like, a priority for this council. And I would have thought that everybody thought that yes, it was.
I've got a sister heavily involved at management level of the health system, and I think there's so much change going on in that space about even elective surgery. You can be, technically, you can be flown in an airplane to Auckland to get brain surgery, and you can get cancer treatment in Invercargill or Balclutha. It's such a big open space, and I think it get back to our core business is not manipulating or having discussion or wasting time on a system that's still evolving itself. And I think Dunedin has to get its hospital sorted out first. And I think there is going to be the need, and in here there will be what it is, but health is changing at such a rate that I can see. I don't think we should be playing in it any more time other than being available for conversation. What's our community want? We will have growth, and there will be, we have got hospitals, but I just think it's such a big, the water, our own business is big enough without having to worry about taking that on. We can have a point of view on it, but Dunedin's got to be fixed soon. I think the government's got to find out a system that works for it. Like I say, you fall off your bike on the rail trail, you're up in a helicopter, you go to Dunedin. And I think there's 36 flights out of Central Otago between Boxing Day and New Year's. They all went to Dunedin or to Christchurch. So their way they're looking at health is different than what we have it historically been. So I'm not a fan of jumping in more. Like Tracy's on health boards. You know, if you live in Central Otago, it's like a lot of things, you've moved away from facilities that you want if you need a lot of help.
Can I just jump in there? Remembering once again and reminder, talking a 30-year plan. We're not just talking about what might happen in the next couple of years. We know the growth that's coming at us. We will be bigger than coastal Otago, if you like, within the next 15 years or so. We do know already through research with our own community that healthcare is the #1 concern that they have and with what they want their focus on. So council may not have any role in healthcare, but it can certainly be the advocate for improved healthcare delivery in our region. And this is a mechanism to potentially do that.
And I think it's that advocacy role, and while 36 helicopter flights out of here to Dunedin between those dates at about $15,000 a flight, I understand, is $500,000 that could have been spent on something else.
But that's the
And that's the thing, it's fine for now, and yes, it is appropriate that somebody who needs critical trauma care is flown to the base hospital, and that is best practice. However, when we have 130,000 people living in this catchment between us and Queenstown, 100 helicopter flights every 2 days is not a viable option.
30-year plan, I'm saying the government is changing for the government as well. And they'll be a better place. We might be an advocate group, yeah, we want help. Everyone wants help. Everyone wants it all next door. But is it our role rather than just a basic advocate group?
What are your thoughts, Tracy, since you're so well entrenched in health here?
Well, I think the reality is with health, it affects absolutely, it touches everybody. And I see your point, Stu, but I disagree in that our community tells us they want us to have a voice, and this is our opportunity. We've got these esteemed colleagues down the end of the table telling us that this is our opportunity to put something forward. And I appreciate the not playing in space that we're not, I guess, what we're not playing in the space as to say what services are there. What we're saying is the people have told us they want help. And how can we facilitate that and elevate health and how that looks for our catchment, sub-catchment, what do you want to call it, going forward? It's not going to necessarily impact any of us sitting around this table, but it will impact our kids and our grandchildren. So if that actually means that it looks better down the track for them, then I think that's something that we have to back up.
Oh, we can advocate for it, that's what I'm saying, but it's a big moving fest the governments struggle with across the country. And it's the same, Auckland's having the same problem. It's got growth.
Just because it's a moving piece doesn't mean that we shouldn't have a role in it.
Have you got something?
No, I was just going to say, I think the next one probably will feel a little bit similar, which is education, but possibly a little bit less so. So I think because this work has been done on the health stuff already by Helen, and Tim's been involved and Tamer's been involved, and we can see the need, we hear the need immediately from our community. We know that the delivery of healthcare has an impact on our economy because we lose people having to spend time in Dunedin supporting family while they keep being looked after, or people don't move to our region because of the lack of healthcare facilities that other people in their family or they themselves may be looking for. So we know it has a direct economic impact. What the next slide that I was going to introduce you to was the education one. And this is even evolved, the title's no longer called Delivering High Quality Schooling, but it's more about education. We know our schools are challenged. We know that the capacity, particularly in high schools, is going to be maxed out within a few years. We know this challenge is no different to any other part of the country. We don't know that there's actually any difference to us to any other part of the country, and does this actually go into the regional deals proposal as one of our 5 priorities, because yes, it has an impact on all sorts of stuff, we know that, but we're no different to any other part of the country. I think health is a little bit different, Stu, in that there is already a proposal. It looks like a smart proposal that could actually deliver for us. And so I just wanted to kind of put these two side by side almost and say, we're not sure that schools or education is one that we would actually follow, but health is probably one we would.
Do you think, Dylan, that this might be where we say, recognising that schooling and education as a whole is quite challenging for some of our communities, in particular Cromwell, but is that where we might say we would prefer to see something in relation to Falls Dam as a priority, as opposed to something in relation to schooling?
Yeah, I think so. And look, Tracy and Warren, you're both there. I mean, you guys will be hearing this from every part of the country, I'm sure, relating to the education sector, whether that's early childhood, primary or secondary. We know this is a challenge nationwide. I'm not sure we've got any opportunity to be a greater priority than others across the country.
I think does a really good job of identifying all those areas, and I think the question I'd probably just put behind it is you're ultimately going to have to select 5 from a regional perspective. So how health and education kind of ranks with energy and transport and the other areas we are still covered. And Dylan, you said there was 8. You know, you've got all of those in the mix, and then you will need to decide how do you prioritise for the most top 5 that you want to really focus on as a region to deliver these economic outcomes, you know, improved infrastructure, help addressing housing issues. So I think that is one of the challenges of the regional deals, is because there are a lot of issues on the table, and all of these areas that identified, it's really good to be able to identify them, and then you need to work out a process of how you actually going to prioritise from there.
Does anybody want to spend more time on schools, or should we move to the next one?
Well, the only observation I'm making is that schools is one part of the education system.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, some of the second early childhood, we know is an issue to try and get kids into families so they can actually work in other areas like the Target Polytech and work staying in Cromwell. So I think it should be part of the mix at this stage. Where it comes to the priorities, would need to be worked through, but I think it's just not as simple as a few high schools as in primary schools.
Yeah, and I think that was,
Yeah, both ends.
yeah.
And Neil, just to put
focus was on Ministry of Education, which is obviously year 0 to 13, not tertiary or early childhood, and that's probably not as much of a priority for us, that Ministry of Education. So, all right. Did you got enough on that, Dylan, for the next?
Yeah, I have. And Neil, just so you know, when we have discussed education from our perspective, we've really flagged early childhood and the provision of training, whether that be trades or things through Otago Polytech and Cromwell, as our priorities.
And that just shows, reflects the differences between the two areas, really.
Yeah.
Kind of points out what they want, but yeah, but they have different needs. Yeah.
Actually, workplace skills training is probably one of the biggest.
Correct.
Schools.
And you know, you can correlate a direct economic benefit by having skills-based work training. I think much better than you can say, well, we need a new primary school or a new high school. We'll move forward. Sharing the value created by growth. So I guess if you look in the grey box, there is a lot of things in here, and a number of them relate to essentially housing related matters, and how you try to make the building and development of housing more affordable for the purchaser. It may have an impact on developer, and then of course we know developers pass that on to the purchaser, so that may have a reverse impact. So a lot of this stuff needs to be worked through. Some of the things in there, like incentivising build to rent schemes. We know there's a challenge with rentals in our district. There is also in Queenstown's. How can we incentivise more people to want to build a property for it to be rented, not to be their secondary home or not to be on Airbnb? Is there things in there that we can do, working with the government to do that? Disincentivising land banking. So if there's sites that are identified in our spatial plans for development and people are sitting on them, well, how do we then encourage them to move that land to someone who will develop it or start developing it? are there mechanisms that we can work with on government to do that? There's, of course, the very first one up the top there, the visitor levy. So again, this is the Queenstown lens, but Queenstown's view is the visitor levy is to pay for infrastructure. The conversation we've internally been having is the visitor levy should pay for infrastructure, but it should also support things like economic development and destination management, because if we get those right, then we essentially end up having more visitors, which creates greater levy to pay for the different things that we will require, and a better managed destination that the residents will appreciate. The one that's not on this list, and of course it will be on this list because we've discussed it many times, so when you see version 2 you will see it, is the discussion around a return of mining royalties to the district. And we're not only talking new mines, so we're not talking about what potentially may happen up at Terrace. We're also talking about existing mines. So there's obviously activity already happening in the Tibet Valley. So we want to just be aware we're not talking solely Santana, we're talking any mining activity. And we're not just talking about what might be discovered in Terrace, but any future discoveries and what a return of royalties into our district may look like. That probably sums it up for now.
Dylan, oh, sorry.
Well, you go first.
We might have the same thing. Just in relation to that disincentivising land banking.
It was.
If somebody chooses to buy land and then we come in and say we're not going to ask them to not develop it, well, surely that's the landowners, that's completely, if they choose to buy the land and pay the rates and do everything that is perfectly, I mean, just because it could be developed doesn't mean that it has to be. And I'm just not sure how that actually looks. I mean, we could argue that there's a whole lot of land that should be developed, but
Agriculture.
I mean, it actually, I'm a little bit confused as to why we think that we can stand over with a stick and disincentivize people as opposed to because you're singling out a group.
I mean, this table here is really a government for Nicola Willis. There's a share levy to put infrastructure in. Well, why don't you get a tax incentive for developers to actually recoup some of their investment in infrastructure and get tax relief? Because ultimately, if the developer's developing and they can get a 16% tax relief on their money, because they can get it cheaper elsewhere, I mean, capturing land value increases, well, that's capital gains tax, effectively. Good, if we want to do it, pick it up that way. And I'm exactly the same with Tracy, disincentivising the land banking. Well, the Sue Hoy family is one of the earliest families in New Zealand, got 90 hectares in Cromwell. It's their choice whether they can fund that and pay the rates on that. If they don't want to be built out, they don't get sold out. And even countries around the world are like that. But the incentive would be to a developer to get a tax relief or to, you know, so that's a really tricky page. A really tricky page where really it's tax. A lot of it comes down to tax because the business person in that situation is taking all of the risk.
I agree. Thanks for your input and thinking. And look, these are
And that may be what
discussion
we'll do,
items.
give tax relief to infrastructure.
It could well be, right? So this is the point, right? These are the draft ideas up for discussion and seeking your input.
Right.
So if you,
Sorry, Dylan, I just support what Tracy and you said, just about the sanctity of property rights, but is there a discussion to be had around council role in zoning? And when you rezone, you create windfall profits. Has there been in other areas mechanisms to try and capture that?
no, I think this would be the one to try to capture that in if we can.
And I guess that's just not talking about someone who's bought a section that's thinking in 5 years' time they're going to retire here and then build on it. It's not about capturing those people, but there are some profits
When
where
you rezone areas, potentially you've created huge windfall profits for the existing landowners.
yeah.
At the stroke of a pen, and I don't quite know what to think about that.
But you're doing it with the intention of if the person who owns that piece of land, they could sell it to a developer, or they could develop it themselves because they now can, which allows a varying amount of opportunity for things to allow growth.
I'm agreeing with you that I don't think you can start fixing people to force them to not hand bank. But when council is actually making a proactive policy and putting it in place, and creating, I don't know if there is an answer. Has there been anywhere in New Zealand where councils have tried to capture those windfall profits that occur through rezoning?
I don't know.
The short answer is, no, it's been looked at a lot. It's very tricky and the closest thing you have is targeted rates.
Yeah.
So you've got the planning uplift, you do the rezoning, the development potential increases, and immediately the value of the land increases. Whether they choose to keep it or sell it. And the only way that you can pull some of that back is the council is sort of targeted rate. There are other members around the world, China, because the government owns all the land. So if they rezone or they invest public infrastructure and the land goes up. So I've been looking at comments as well. So investment in public infrastructure, technical infrastructure, the surrounding land increases the value. Value capture is a very tricky thing and under our system, there's no sort of clean mechanism. So target the rates are very close to
So,
It's a reason to keep the conversation in the mix, because we will have cases coming whereby we're building infrastructure past big tranches of empty land to develop things on the other side.
There are capital development contributions that do capture that.
and we are looking at increasing our DCs significantly.
And the only other thing is you look at the roading network, there's a subsidy from government for improvement or maintenance to a percentage of your value of your economy. So if you really want to start looking at infrastructure, the government only got to say any new infrastructure from this date forward to there, they may subsidise to 15 to 20% effectively to allow that the risk is taken, because their duty is the same as the tax take. And it's no point having interest coming back to the GST, coming back to the Housing Development Fund. The government can live 2% in GST, but if they invest in infrastructure, then you will get infrastructure in a controlled way.
Do you want to, sorry, yes,
Can I just say that for me, and I just think there's a lot included under this sort of heading and category, probably quite a bit to unpack. Maybe just when you're looking at a particular project or initiative under a heading like this, you want to be really clear about what sort of activity and what is the problem you're seeking to address and what's the opportunity on the table, and then what is your ask in central government. So I think that kind of clarity around that is probably going to be helpful in terms of pitching a particular project or initiative under each of these kind of categories.
So do you want to keep that one in the mix then, Dylan, and move on to the next one?
Yeah, and thanks, Tracy. I was actually just going to touch on something similar there, because I think, look, my view in here might be that all those ones that relate to land development and things like that might all be things that we actually go, that's not the focus in here for a regional deal. The focus that we need is a visitor levy and the mining royalties conversation. That might be simply where we sit in this package, and the other stuff is things that may just have to be shelved.
Yeah, well, Dylan, I'll just go back to the issue
Morning, ladies and gentlemen.
with this paper is that it is very Queenstown centric, and as a council, we've already dismissed the Queenstown model to assist with affordable housing. We looked at it and we couldn't make it work on this side of the ditch. And, you know, if there's things that we need to look at is increasing the supply of rental accommodation, well, that means that is it a role for council to get involved in that social housing aspect? Is it looking at some of the tools we have with leasehold land and things like that? Because we looked at the Queenstown model and
But are you making a distinction between social housing and affordable housing?
I think to have affordable housing, it has become social housing.
I disagree.
And I don't know that that's what we're covering at the moment in this workshop.
And
I think we keep
I
it
think
in the
we'll
mix.
end up down a big rabbit hole on that one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you'll be here all day.
I know.
Move us forward. All right. this is one which has been discussed quite extensively in the last few days. That it it sat in the background for a little while, but I think we're starting to realise this needs to be one of the priorities. And this is about attracting investment into the region, but it's also attracting investment into New Zealand. So using the profile of Queenstown and the beauty of our region as a collective, and having a footprint, whether that's NZTE or its Overseas Investment Office, having specialists in our region that can help and assist with people who are looking at investing in New Zealand. Now, hopefully some of that investment comes to our region, some of that investment might go broader, but we think there's a real opportunity in this around trying to create a smoother pathway for people who do want to invest in the region and in the country.
Anyone have any comments on that one?
The only comment I'd make is wherever you sit on all of these matters, there's a high possibility all of this is going to change with a change of government. And how far through can we get some of this stuff that's going to be ticked off with the possibility of a change of government?
That might be one for them.
I'm looking down that end of the table. And we've seen, and there's a reason why I say it, because we've seen it in Three Waters. Different dressing gown to what they've had on before, but it leaves us sitting down this end of the table, trying to manage our communities and our communities' expectations of things. And I can imagine from your perspective, things aren't exactly thrilling when things change either in a hurry, but how do we, when we have our community members say, we're talking about regional deals, whatever they all may take, how do we know that you guys are going to spend all this time and then it's going to be on the back burner with the change?
Yeah, what's the risk? But, if you look at the previous government, their approach was through the UGA partnerships, which are 6. And that's one's instead of QLDC. It's all the base for discussion. Now, there are 22 proposals to come forward. But I'll be honest with you, they're at varying states of readiness that we all think are ready. But the ones that are based on a UGA partnership are well advanced, well thought through, and the regional deals is this government's approach to relationship with the previous government and the UGA. So there's always some form of connection, and I think they continue to build on each other, and ultimately this is central government, local government working together. Oh, sorry, even growth continues, so it's entwined. Sorry, the government acronyms, but
Maybe just, I mean, I think the concept of regional deals is supposed to be an enduring partnership. So between local and central government, essentially this idea of a 30-year vision with a 10-year plan. And you can see also one of the criteria is around commitment to a regional spatial plan. So this concept that you're putting in place something that's got some of that longevity and that should endure change of the government, but it is a challenge and it is a risk. But I think essentially the concept of regional deals is really about how do you get central and local government to work together better and look at it in a longer term vision and look at it as what can the region do to develop and get these outcomes around improved economic growth, connected resilient infrastructure, and improvement of affordable quality housing. So I think the objectives are quite, I think there's some longevity in those objectives. I don't think necessarily change of government is going to not recognise those are long-term issues that New Zealand needs to address. How they address it, this current government's approach. It's also part of the coalition government between ACT and National, so city and regional deals. So we've got a little bit of cross-party support in that sense. But the idea is really that they should be in a long-term partnership to avoid these kind of situations and to try and prevail over that economic and political cycles that we're all part of every 3 years. And
Have we got a population cap in New Zealand? I've been to quite a few conferences where Helen Clark, like she came out and said we were 7 million, maybe John Key said we might be 8 million is our level. Because anything we're doing, if we keep having growth, we're still going to have the same problem 20 years down the road. Now, without being disrespectful, this table will change in 3 to 6 years. The staff are employed for 3 to 5 years. Your staff and the government change every 5, 6 and 9 years. So, and well, it's a bit different from us in the agriculture, we're in it for hundreds of years, but actually the system changes a lot quicker. And if we have growth, we're never going to be able to cater for growth in Central Otago because they all want to come and live here. So it's a hard.
I don't think any government, any party in New Zealand has ever put a policy in place around the population level cap.
But that's always going to be the issue.
Yeah.
That's a challenge.
Yeah.
We need growth to fund for your retirement. I mean,
Just letting you all know, we're about 6 minutes behind time, but also Penny's just about to join us. So she's going to dial in from QLDC. So she'll be there to answer any questions. Penny's essentially being like the secretariat for this piece of work, and so can answer probably some of the more difficult questions you might have had, or questions that relate to some of the Queenstown ideas. I'll just skip to the next one, because I think this is one where you might see opportunities for the likes of Falls Dam, Stu, which is increasing productivity through economic resilience. Now, hi Penny, how are you? Thanks for joining.
Kia ora, no problems.
Kia ora. So this has once again primarily been a initiative put forward by QLDC, and looking at how they'd increase productivity through diversifying their economy. Now, what are the options in a CODC perspective where we might need to look at that economic resilience? And I think we'd all agree, as you've already raised, Stu, agriculture and resilience in that sector is one that we may wish to consider.
Cool. Did you want to cover off that next one, Dylan?
I mean, yep. Sorry, I should not mute myself and then talk. And then the very last one, I think, increasing the value of tourism. So this could go hand in hand with others. So this could be an amalgamation, or this could be a deal where we focus in on essentially delivering key projects identified in the destination management plans and economic development plans of both QLDC and CODC, and how that might be delivered on. I think we can all acknowledge this part of the country is regarded as kind of the jewel in the crown, if you like, as to why people are coming to New Zealand, and we don't want to forget that, and it's an important part of the New Zealand story. So how can we leverage that and make sure we've got the best possible tourism system and industry down here to deliver for visitors, but also for business owners in our communities and things like that. To do that, there's still a lot of work to do to bring in our destination management plan. Some of that could be through product development initiatives that we already know we need, things like a new hotel, investment into Cromwell and things like that we know is needed, more activities that get people to stop and stay in Roxburgh and in Ranfurly, creating that stickability through product development. So there are things like that that would be in this mix if this is an initiative we wish to put forward. And that was the last of the 8.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions or comments on those ones at this time?
The tourism regional deal with tourism, one of the biggest drivers for down this region will be the airfare cost out of Auckland. Most of the numbers coming through the rail trail now are Australians coming on flat stick because it's cheaper to get from Australia than it is from Auckland and take their bike. So I'm not saying we should be subsidised, but the cost of travel to Queenstown from anywhere else in New Zealand is probably hamstringing the industry if it is. And you talk about, we had the business meeting last night in Ranfurly, you talk about the risks to tourism. As the Omacare commercial shut, the Turuhua tavern nearly shut, Ranfurly hasn't got food. But any industry you're trying to grow and you haven't got the infrastructure to cater for the industries there. 50 million has been spent in the corner up here just in the last 2 weeks of the film set. You can't get a meal. So, they run the risk of, if we don't have it flowing through, and I don't know how you fix tavern's not making money or profit, because at the end of the day, it's got to be paid and be paid. And when you haven't got the infrastructure to cater for the growth, you get hurt twice.
100% Stu. And I think there's some levers you can pull and some you can't, right? And
Yeah,
initiatives, we can't control what a pub owner does or doesn't wish to do. And many people we know buy those things thinking it's a wonderful lifestyle and realise it's actually not as easy as they thought it might be. But things we can do and things we can encourage and try to progress is things like making the connection with the Roxburgh Gorge Trail. Advocating for those kind of things because we know that has a positive impact. Advocating for the Taieri Gorge train to return and things like that. Not necessarily that we may have an impact, but at least we can advocate. Now that may or may not be in the scope of a regional deal, but those are the things that we can have those impacts. Because I think we can't impact what Air New Zealand charges for a flight. And if you're looking long term, I think we'll see that go up and down as we always do. Flights to Queenstown between Australia are pretty reasonable, in fairness, at the moment, when you look at other places, right? So I think we'll always find that there's a market. It's just how do we best attract that market, and it's not always volume. And I think this is the primary piece about both destination management plans. It's actually been more about quality over quantity, and that's been our approach for quite some time. And we're seeing that same approach coming out of Queenstown and Waitangi now too.
I think I'll just add to that we now have to find a quite fine balance between what actually we want and we have social license from our communities for in terms of tourism, which is that increasing the value and productivity of tourism, and what the government is now coming out with saying we just want more and more and more people, more tourism. So that's what they'll want to see come through in this, but that's not what we want to present. So we're going to have to walk quite a fine line in how we balance that in this proposal.
Dylan, I wonder, morning Penny, it's great to have you here. I just wonder if this might be a good opportunity, Dylan, for Penny to highlight and to let you know, Penny, that the article in the ODC was quite a surprise for our councillors this morning, as you can imagine, and I suspect was probably a surprise for many of the people at QLDC and potentially elected members. So I wondered if you might like to give us just a brief update on where QLDC is at. We've been through the timeline of when we're planning to have our joint meetings and catch-ups, which I think is a really important part of the partnership. But I guess, maybe highlight where QLDC is currently at in terms of the regional deal.
Awesome. Kia ora koutou, ko Penny Pearce, tōku ingoa. I'm the strategy and reform manager at QLDC and have been pulling together the regional deal kind of content and focus on our side. So I assume the article you're talking about was the private sector interest in transport and hospital. Is that what you're referring to? Yes.
Yep.
So in terms of our overall where we're at with the regional deal, I've just been at a session with our councillors basically running through where we're at with that. The content that Dylan has run you through today, we ran through with our councillors a few weeks ago, and so the discussion we've just had with them now is basically updating them on where we're at in terms of working with CODC and ORC, and where we're likely to be bringing in, well, not where we're likely to, how we are bringing in the CODC flavour and content into each of those packages. We haven't updated them yet, but we were just running them through the areas that will need to change and be kind of fleshed out to have a broader sub-region focus, and they were happy with that. The only thing that kind of there was some discussion about, which I imagine will come up in the joint session, is the Santana Mine royalties element. So that's something that Dylan, we can pick up in our next catch up in terms of putting a bit more around if we're going to include that, what is it that we want to include? What is it that we think the royalties would be spent on? A bit more of an idea about that, so that the joint councils can have a good discussion about that. So in terms of the private sector, So this group that is kind of backed by Rod Jury and is headed by Ross Copeland has been around for a while. So Ross, when he moved back down to Queenstown, pulled together a kind of range of private sector people who had an interest in trying to move Queenstown forward in terms of infrastructure with things that they saw were falling through the cracks or weren't directly the responsibility of council or central government. And so they've for some time been meeting and going, well, where could we as the private sector help with this? So that's been going probably for about 18 months. Not that we knew that, but that's how long it's been going on for. At the start of the regional deal process, they kind of originally put forward a whole proposal for the regional deal and wanted to kind of lead it. We've had a range of discussions with them and with government so that everybody's clear that actually the councils are the ones who need to front a regional deal, but that the government wants to see councils and their agents, central government agencies, partnering with the private sector where possible to help deliver some of the infrastructure needs. And so we have continued to have contact with Ross about their proposals and what they want to do. And so the two key things that were in, or the two they mentioned in that article are the two where we see there is alignment with the regional deal proposal and what they want to do for the region. So the regional deal proposal itself won't be saying so if you take the transport one, it won't be saying we want to put in a gondola that goes from here to here on this route, and you know there's this group headed by Ross Copeland that's going to deliver it. What the regional deal proposal will set out is the economic case for bringing forward investment in offline mass rapid transport, where that economic case has already been established through the public transport and Queenstown transport business cases, and then indicate that there is some interest, that the reason that that might be possible is because there is a private sector actor who might be willing to do it. They will then probably write a letter separately to government saying, we're really happy to be involved and we want to build a thing. And one of the things we'd be asking for in the regional deal is if you want to go with this, we would like a pathway to be able to partner with the private sector so that we can move it forward at pace. Because obviously we don't have a commercial relationship. There's been no procurement processes. There's no, we're not in a position to actually be saying we can partner with the private sector right now and this is the proposition. So we're kind of running them as parallel but connected processes. And that's the same for the health package. So I don't know if that answers what the questions or concerns were, Tamar, but if anyone has any questions about that, I'd be happy to answer them.
Very helpful. Thank you, Penny. Questions? I think there was just, the tone of the article was that this was a done deal and this was the regional deal that CODC were a part of, but thank you for clarifying that that is not in fact the case.
No. That was news to us. So we didn't know that they were talking to the media. They did have a so the discussions we've had with them are about them being parallel processes that can complement each other. And obviously without private sector interest, for example, in a gondola, the mass rapid transport acceleration is unlikely to be a goer from a regional deal perspective because it needs a private sector party to deliver it. But yeah, we were a bit surprised by the tone of the article.
Yeah. Oh, questions, comments?
So morning royalties, are they not only all derived from where the asset's driven or they become regional?
Oh, right, that's something I guess that needs to be worked through. A little bit, I guess, a visitor levy, taking that forward. It's probably know where the money's going to be spent because you can track that, trace that, and that might go back to where it originated from. I think it's fair to say 250 workers at the mine are going to live across the district. They're going to live in Hawea, Wanaka, Cromwell, Alexandra, so on and so on. So there's a case to be made that, the workers and suppliers and all that sort of stuff are going to be spread far and wide. How does that flow out? How do you share that? I don't know, but it's something that you would have to negotiate with.
The regional deal would negotiate that.
Yeah, I think the partners to the regional deal would have to come up with a position, you know, like Penny was saying. First of all, we'd have to make an economic case to understand whatever royalties we get, what's the intention of that funding? You know, what would that be? What would it fund? Infrastructure, economic, what? You know, so we'd have to make that case, and then we'd have to agree, is there a proportion, you know, I don't know, you know, so, you know, that's something that we'd have to think about.
Well, let's make this an example, I think, to have the work, we had the regional deal agreed, and that was a component of it. Essentially, you've got to commit then from government to make that happen, if that requires legislative change, they will instruct the appropriate agency to undertake that work, but then you work through the details of between that agency and the council.
Mining Sunlight, is it a mining operation? I mean, I guess the point I'm getting, we've got potential from one of the biggest hedge funds in the world, in our corner, putting 600 hectares of solar in. And there's no way we can capture a deal on that because.
It's a little bit separate from this.
No, but it's still with it.
For us.
It's still a mining operation. Is it a part of the deal? And we've got to, does that in energy, like energy, we talked about energy is energy.
Yeah, and so, an important thing is that the proposal was for the councils, the group of councils within the region or sub-region, work out the proposal, be clear about the ask of government. Government has said there's no funding available at this time. So realistically, you're looking at new funding tools, you're looking at legislative change to remove regulatory barriers to make these things happen, in alignment with investment, current investment budgets. Those are the sorts of things that government put on the table. It's then on the councils to think about, okay, what's our specific ask and what will that enable if we bring that through. So, you know, a little bit of back on councils to work out.
And I think that would fall back into that value capture conversation that we were talking about as one of the slides.
So if you look at a project like Santana, which is it being fast tracked or is it fast tracked?
Yep.
It is.
It has been.
Yeah.
It will be. It's in the first catch and they expect to release it.
So there's the capacity within the fast track process to introduce. I mean, either as a CODC by itself or more regionally, we've got a big interest in the fast track process, which could risk not giving enough weight to the environmental and mitigating factors that are needed, and we as a council, as a region, end up dealing with costs and not having a sufficient say in what mitigation rules might be put in place. And similarly with royalties, there's really capacity within the fast track process to redirect royalties, or is it indigenous law?
On the first one, maybe I'll jump in, because we will be submitting as a council. So that's where we'll make the case around conditions, rehabilitation, so all that sort of stuff, bonds, things like that. So I think that deals with the first bit. The second bit,
Although, sorry, just to ask, there's not just putting something in place, it's actually the monitoring costs as well.
oh, no, that's right. They're ongoing, you know, because we'll be left to manage the conditions. So if it was granted.
Okay, so that's maybe taken care of.
Yeah, so that's something we'd be making the case in our submissions. Now, it's up to the panelists to then make a decision based on.
Monitoring costs are paid for by the whole. Right.
And maybe just say the concept of regional deals is, from the central government perspective, is better coordination of all of these processes. So linking that fast track into a component of a regional deal is one of the ideas. And the idea of mining royalties and a potentially different way of sharing those royalties has already been raised by Minister Jones. It's come up in the context of the West Coast. Publicly, this has been publicly discussed. So these are all potential options that could be in front of you as part of the regional deal.
You got that aspect done? Noted?
Sorry.
Just checking that Dylan's captured that.
I was just going to say, I think essentially what Tracy's just said is obviously while we might be putting this forward in a regional deal, we know there are other parts of the country where mining activity is undertaken as well. So there's the potential for flow on or other regions having a similar conversation at the same time. So how that all pans out, Nigel, around the return of royalties, I'm sure will be quite the hot topic within central government as this comes forward.
In terms of coordination across government of those various processes, like fast track, that is actually something that the proposal asks for specific information on how we're responding, how each of the councils is responding to a range of different government programs. And the way we're planning on approaching that is actually linking the ask through the regional deal to a coordinated view across those programs, because those programs have flow-on impacts to our ability to deliver our core services and to our infrastructure. And so we're planning on including that link explicitly in the proposal.
Penny, I wonder, I recognise you've only got a couple of minutes, and I wondered if you could cover off in terms of the timeline of what's coming next, I guess what will be covered in that February 5th online workshop for all councillors, and then if you have any further on how much closer we are to confirming the 11th and or 12th of February for the in-person, because I think the in-person meeting is going to be incredibly important for the partnership.
Yes, so on the for the 5th of February session, we would be sending in advance, so you've had time to review and consider it, basically updated packages that are aligned to what we're expected to provide in the actual proposal. So we kind of presented in a similar way as you've seen today, but including all of the content all of the content requirements we're expected to comment on. So a more fulsome description and case supporting each package based on the feedback that you will have given today that we've previously got from our councillors, and that the working group across the ODC, QODC and ORC in terms of making the packages more sub-region, more of a sub-region focus than a QODC focus. And so the intent is for the councillors all together to be able to ask questions and discuss the packages with the other parties around the table. And I understand that we are on board to have that 11th or 12th date. I'm not sure which one we landed on. That's with Glyn's EA. She should come back with something on that today. But I think Dylan, whatever the date was that Anita had already set out with the ORC councillors, was the one that we proposed to our councillors, which is the in-person meeting. So I'm not sure that all our councillors will attend, but we are trying to manage that by at least having a core delegation of people who are going to come in person to ORC.
Yeah,
for that
thanks,
session.
Penny. We've got that in for, I just checked before, 9 to 11 on the 12th.
Yeah.
Cool, thank you. Penny, was there anything that you wanted to cover off or mention before we need to get away?
No, all good.
Anybody questions for Penny? Wonderful. Thanks very much for joining us this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thanks, Penny.
And I'm aware, Dylan, that very shortly it'll be your flight being called in the background. So is there anything that you want to wrap up?
No, look, appreciate your time this morning. I'm sure as you go away from this, you will probably, thoughts will evolve and continue to evolve. So please, by all means, fire through when you think that comes to mind. That workshop on the 5th, as Penny said, you'll get more information, more updated information. So from the conversation we've had, I'll pass that through, make sure some of that thinking is integrated into the next lot of slides that you'll see. Big thank you to Warren and Tracy being in the room. Huge help being able to translate much of that central government conversation and speak for us, I'm sure. So really appreciate that. And yeah, if anyone has any questions in the meantime, or you're not sure about anything, just flip me an email, and I promise there will be plenty more emails to come on this.
Perfect. And I just wondered, Tracy, with the very truncated timeline across the Christmas holidays, which seems to be a common thing, do you anticipate that any of the areas will be asking for an extension on that 28th of Feb date, and would it be offered?
Look, I think it's a good it's a good question, and I think it's recognised that this is a really tight first time frame, particularly in terms of actually arriving at joint priorities between the different parties. And I think what we're expecting is, it is a light touch proposal, so essentially the template that's been sent out that needs to be filled in is pretty clear on that. It's asking for some pretty high level comments and input at this stage. I think the intention is to have everything in by the 28th, because we're a bit concerned on the other side. The proposals will need to come in, they'll need to be assessed, and then they will go over to the ministerial grouping, which is infrastructure and investment ministers group, who will make a decision and then put that up to cabinet. The timeline is looking to move to an MOU with the first deal by about June, with the idea that the first deal will be done in 2025 and then two more by October 2026. So you can see that's quite a time frame both on our side as well, in terms of getting through approval processes. And that's the indication in terms of, as Warren said, there's kind of roughly 3 deals within this next sort of 2-year period.
Do you think, recognising that there's 5 priorities that are going to be light touch, that will then need a substantial amount more work, some of them more than others?
Yeah.
If, for example, we come up with our 5, we get 2 months down the process and 2 of them are actually not achievable at all in the required time frame, would there be the ability to have a couple of backup priorities, or would you just be then seeking a deal with 3?
No, that's a good question too, because I think as you see in the light touch proposal, they've asked for arrangement of priorities, and it's good that you've looked at 8 as possible areas. Put down what the best top 5 are, but it may be, as you say, that some of the aspects of those projects or initiatives might need a bit more time working, can't be achieved, so therefore you might be then looking back at some of those other than that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the idea of going forward, narrowing it down in terms of what your priorities are as a partnership, and then having those other ones as potential ones that, again, should this be worked through and developed, and it can't be achieved in the time frame, and to look at what is going to happen then. It may also be that actually 3, if it's narrowed down to 3, maybe those are the ones that go through. So I think this idea is, go broader, 5 top priorities. Those will be the ones that we look to be taken through, but some of them may need to be changed because some of the processes or timing might require more.
And does that mean that there may well be the opportunity for the ministers or the panel to say, we'll take those 3, but not 5? Will they be able to pick and choose what the priorities will be from those 5 potentially, or is it?
Well, I think the idea is that local government, put up with it,
Yeah.
and then now work through. And so, there might be some aspects of those that can't be delivered in that time, and they just have to change. But the idea is really that it's local government is putting up what are their top 5, what do they see as the top 5 projects or initiatives that are going to contribute to those outcomes. So I tie them really closely to the priority objectives, the improvement in economic growth, collective resilient infrastructure, and improvement of supply and quality of housing.
I'm sure it'd be a completely collaborative process. A lot of lovely back and forth. Yeah.
So what you're describing is a process that you put caveat on that there's explicitly no funding from government for any of the priorities that
No new funding. So there could be like a reallocation of funding, or there could be some other ways of tax. I mean, I think also I'd be really bold, that's really encouraging government to be bold in some of the initiatives you put in more of that money and be funded in finance. For example, some of the ideas that they're raising in the meeting today.
But it's tricky. You can have an aspiration
Yes.
around education, health, and talk to the council about it.
Yeah.
Or you get a specific proposal like a full stand.
I think they tend to be to be aspirational, so realistic.
Also,
Realistic in terms of what can be achieved.
aspiration doesn't take money. Full stand is a pretty simple process.
Yeah.
You're 100 million doing that.
Yeah, and there is no money, but there are aspects like the regional infrastructure fund, where there is some money and some projects, and those may be some of the projects that are water stuff.
Good.
Thank you very much for that.
If you have these conversations, we can sort over the next 4 or 5 weeks. To put this up in the minister's place and think about this will ultimately be a political decision. We will make recommendations based on the criteria agreed with the ministers. But as Scott said, it will go to the infrastructure investment ministerial group and then make a recommendation in cabinet. So if you think about this sort of things that we take into consideration, and being really clear about the economic growth, being those overarching objective of this. The focus will be on additive, being additive. So you're thinking about, tourism in Queensland, for example, is something that does very well, squeezing a little bit more out of that compared to those that comes forward with economic investigation and opening up a whole new sector, creating new jobs that didn't previously exist, creating a stronger economic base than currently exists. Those are the sorts of things that are going to convince us. So I sort of just want to keep that in mind. And finally, and very respectfully, this suggests that conversations you will have to bring views with community states your partner in this regional proposal. It's very important that that's issue. Try and get that in-house as much as you can, but you don't have that playing out in the public arena and through the media, because government is looking for confidence in establishing a relationship, and if there's any signs that you don't have a cohesive approach within the partners, individual parts of partnership, that might make them a little bit nervous. So I was being up front about that, and that's somewhat out of my realm. It's in the political space, but that's just the reality of how you made it.
It's a pity he's not still on the line then, isn't it?
What's that, sorry?
It's a pity he's not still on the line then, isn't it?
Well, yeah,
I guess
the same advice would be good.
Yeah.
that's going to be the issue with the ORC as well, isn't it?
As long as you're advised for those two parties as well as.
No,
Yeah, I mean, it feels to me,
How the ministers will be thinking and sort of things I'll take into consideration, just something to be informed.
Do you think in terms of the economic growth piece, rather than trying to squeeze a bit more out of tourism, there's a lot more opportunity for Central Otago to play a bigger role in that as well? Because we've got a lot more space and land and we're not as crowded as QLDC is, for example. So there's probably more opportunity for us as a region to be able to grow with that as well than just looking at Queenstown being the jewel in the crown.
Yeah, and I just use that as example, but absolutely, as I say, the diversification and creating new capacity or new funding streams that really exist in the time and economic growth opportunities will in favour with this decision.
Thank you. What I think we'll do, yes, is that I'll just introduce Marlon Bridge, who's joined us from BIA, but I'm just telling you who he is so you can see him in the morning tea room, because we're all just going to take a 10-minute break. Yeah, so you can grab a cup of coffee or your water or whatever you need to do, and we'll be back here at 10 to 12. Lost a couple along the way, but
Wherever Tracy is.
I think she was just.
And Sally here, that's all we need to.
Yeah, well, Stu, we can sort it out.
We'll sort it out.
Yep.
Let's go. Get the chain off.
You're changing ways off, so it's possible to keep you tied up. Perfect. Right, this is no doubt the highlight you've all been waiting for. Local water done well. For that, yes. This is exciting. This is the opportunity for all those curly questions you've been saving up, Michael, and I know they'll be on your yellow little
And I
page.
did just have a silly question of me, but he'll throw at you, Marlon. But, you know, so, just to start this, and so, we did send out a couple of presentations. One was from the Morrison Low conclusion of the stuff we landed at the end of last year. I won't refer to that, but you've got that now. I would encourage you to read it because that really is the starting point for the work that's happening now. And I'll just talk about the work that's happening now because you'll recall in that last series of meetings we had and some of our colleagues around the district, they all agreed to explore a regional CCO opportunity. So that's where a bit of work's happening right now. We're sort of, you know, there's a lot to do. Timelines are tight, but you know we are starting. So we're maybe a little bit behind the 8 ball, but we're still pretty confident that we'll be able to work our way through the process. Do you want to go to the next slide? Yeah. So just quickly, Morrison Low. We've engaged Morrison Low and an independent contractor who supported the Otago Southland region in the last 6 months of last year to help produce some of the information we've provided to you. We've employed them collectively to help us because we do need some external support. And as we work our way further down this process, we probably need more. But at the moment, we've taken a couple of people on board. We are, you know, working up the project objectives, the scope, the time, resource requirements and costs. ULDC, you'll see them in the slide at the very end. But they really are on the periphery. They have to make up their own mind. At the moment, it is just Waitaki, it is us, it's Clutha and it's Ward. The CEs met last week with Andrew and Stu, who come from Morrison Low and the independent contractor. So we've had our first meeting just to sort of give some shape to it. We've got a discussion tomorrow, a quick discussion with the mayors who sit over the top. Just to get their thoughts from them and you'll see the structure that we're proposing to help guide some of those discussions, which is taken straight off the DIA template. And but you can see we do need to come up with some sort of commitment agreement gratuitously. DIA produced that. We'll be seeking a little bit of feedback on the objectives within the template, confirming the governance framework. And we will be having a discussion on the 5th of February with Mana Whenua Partners because that group there, Te Rotu Taio, meets every 6 months. All the 7 runaka south of Waitaki come together to meet with the mayors and the chair of the region's councils. And so it's an opportunity, we'll take that just to update them on where each council is at in regards to Three Waters. So we are trying to work. You know, we are working collaboratively. We would like a bigger entity. It's not looking like that at the moment. It looks like it's just going to be us four. Next slide. I just want to work through these so we get to take some questions. And with Marlon here, he can talk to some of the detail. With a forward view, CODC and Waitaki, we're actually seriously considering employing a transition manager who will be a shared resource between both councils, probably work 4 days a week. And that person will be the point of contact to the working group that we're creating, or the Morrison Low, the contractor, because I know for a fact that if I was to task a GM here with that responsibility, the same as Waitaki, it's going to start being all consuming. And so we do need to focus on our day jobs. We do need to focus on the DLTP. And so we're just going to get a little bit of additional headroom to work that piece of the puzzle for us. That person will then reach down into the organisation and pull the information that we need, but they will be responsible for producing a large chunk of it. It's just so that we can continue to free up staff to be able to focus on what they have to do in their day job, as well as give a little bit of the likes of Julie starts here, finance and all that sort of stuff. HR are going to be heavily involved as we work our way through the water services development plan and subsequent implementation. There's no getting away from that. It's going to require a lot of staff effort, but right now, we think we can be better served if we bring someone on. To fund that, the intent would be to fund that out of the transition funding, better off funding that we still actually have sitting there. We have to apply for it from time to time, but we still have funding tagged for Three Waters. So that's where we're going to be utilising that. The first council executive group meeting, which is mayors, chief executives, and Marlon and others, will be occurring tomorrow, and then we see those happening fortnightly. The agreement that we've sort of landed on, that we'll be sharing, talks about the mayor and one elected member being a representative. We still have to have a think about what involvement is there from Mana Whenua partners, and so part of that discussion will occur over the next few weeks. And that sort of council executive group, it doesn't have decision-making rights as a joint committee does, because it won't be delegated the authority from respective council, but it will have the ability, like we do in the workshop, to provide advice and give a steer to the working groups on the direction of travel and where we need to put our emphasis and effort. And then the intent would be at various stages where we need decisions to be made, to bring that back through the mayors and then back through respective councils, because only councils will be able to sign up, sign off and that sort of stuff and approve. So you can see there right now off the bat, it's governance arrangements, how do we serve local priorities, price harmonisation and pricing. That's going to be a really interesting question. What does that mean? Should we harmonise? If we were to, when should we harmonise? And just getting a general sense from the mayors, what is the feeling within their respective councils and communities on those sorts of issues? And then looking at how we stage the approval process through the councils, because we know we have some hard timelines. We know right off the bat, we're going to have to create something that we can take out to our communities. It's most likely that any consultation will occur after we've done our LTP consultation. So at the earliest, it could occur in May. But so there's a large chunk of work that's going to have to be done to get it to that stage. And then we're going to have to go back through all four respective councils to put their consultation document in front of them to say, this is what we think we need to be taken to our respective communities. What's your thoughts? And then just like the normal LTP consultation approval process, we'll be going through that with each independent council. And then most likely we might even we'll be consulting at the same time. How do we do the submissions? So on and so on. That's the sort of stuff we have to take through.
So can you play us just, we're still looking at standalone.
Yep. So
is that transition?
So
Marlon
can talk to that as well. So, but a couple of things there on that. And so when we go into our own consultation document this year, the one that will come to you next week, it will put a proposition up that our preference is to create a water services entity to run water for us. It will be light on detail because it'll only have the detail we have at this present time. The next proposition we'll be putting up will be a regional CCO, but it will have to be up against, because that would be the proposition, but what's the alternative models that could also come into play? And we'd have to probably articulate that in some detail as well, so that people have a genuine choice and can come back on some sort of comment and feedback.
I mean, it's just that all the conversations we've had over the last while, from the Morrison Low report, all the emphasis on a regional entity.
Yeah,
and I'd have to think that we're being predetermined in what we're doing in the space, because you've just gone through it. You hear nothing about if.
Well, we are doing the work around what does a single council CCO, what does a status quo option look like? Because we have to do that work anyway as part of the LTP. So we have to have the numbers for water investment over the next 9 years as part of this LTP. So we'll be able to make those, have an alternative proposition. But at the moment, because the regional CCO is the one that's going to require a lot of work, hence that's why we're just focusing on it. Because we have to corral every other council.
Yeah.
We talked about that yesterday and whether we actually will compare some of the numbers we're using for our independent CCOs so that there's some consistency, because their initial work, Morrison Lowe had a very high establishment cost that was
Ridiculous.
it was ridiculous. It was about $52 million. And
It would be fair to say that a lot of those Morrison Low figures in their report should be taken with skepticism, I would think.
Well, they were done on the basis of the best information available at the point of time.
That's what worries me.
Hold that question. So this is what we're talking about in the council executive group. So that's the sort of structure we're establishing to work our way through a regional CCO option. Obviously, we don't need that if we were to land on a council CCO option, but that's just the governance that we need to bring this regional picture and build that out. So now perhaps all the questions you've had on local water done well and the merits of it, the merits of a single council CCO versus a multi-council CCO, the status quo, we just do it ourselves in our current configuration. This is the option. So Marlon's been providing a lot of advice up and down the country, has had a look at a number of different councils and what they're doing, and actually he can call bullshit where councils have a self-inflated belief that their solution is the best solution and is viable, because what we have to remember is whatever solution we land on, it has to be financially sustainable. And getting to that point means that we're going to have to increase revenue in the water space to meet that, that key requirement. But Marlon, do you have thoughts?
Maybe I'll just paint a quick picture on who I am. So I'm Chief Technical Advisor for DIA, about 20 years through the world. I started a set up CCO in 2006 for Manukau Water Limited, on behalf of Manukau City Council. And we drove efficiencies and got that operating well. I also was one of three people that led the Super City Water Care setup in 2010, and held various executive roles at Water Care, Chief Customer Officer, CFO, Deputy Chief Executive, and left Water Care as acting Chief Executive to come and help the government 4 years ago now. You said I was going to work for the government for 4 years, I would have told you to shut it, but 4 years now, this will be my 5th year, and being here to try and help councils find a pathway forward on the board. So I'm really here to help, but also use what the government's intentions are to try and find an alignment. So there's been some good starting team on this, and maybe the first thing to say is that, I do commend this council considering the option of regional CCO. I'm certainly a person who understands scale and what it means for delivery of services and how we create efficiency through genuine focus on one activity instead of the 40-odd we might have in council. So, I'm a big advocate for that. I'm also passionate about water. I'm here ultimately to help you get the best solution. And I have no views apart from my own personal ones, which I'll be quite explicit on. And an agenda that the government has that, I'm also aware of what that is. So really happy with the questions. And here's any concerns. Let's just start by painting a national picture that helps on where things are at. Maybe I'll do that quickly. So across the country, start with the biggest treatment arrangement is in the Waikato. There are 7 councils currently looking to put all their assets together within the next 2 years to formulate the CCO and start upgrading. The biggest is Waipa, the smallest is Hauraki. And those councils are working and collaborating now to create in place similar framework to what you've got up there. So it's pleasing to see that you're adopting the government's framework overseeing this process. But Meaty's also doing similar things. So Target Taurons has been out there actively trying to encourage connections with other councils. Western Avenue is an obvious one for them because they're currently doing operations jointly already. And they're looking at the likes of Whakatane and the Thames Corridor. So, so there will be something come out of that. They are at the early stages of working through Northlands. The three councils in the North are currently working together to try and figure out what they do in terms of the joint arrangement, likely CCO. Central North Island's also Taranaki. We've been down there trying to work out what it is. Neighbouring councils to try and get something out really quickly. It's targeting 1 July 25. I think that's the going to achieve that. But we'll do everything we can to help them get something in place. Central, 1 or 2, Palming North, Horowhenua, Kapiti are trying to look at working together. Allspace is doing its thing. It's been doing its thing for a while now. I'm not sure where they're at. It's gone up a little bit more, but Wellington's really good. They started as 10 councils, and they're likely to end up with 2 or 3 sets. So the central city councils will join. The Wellington Water 2.0, so completely different to the existing model, which is clearly an outsourced maintenance arrangement. This will be a full vision of building additional monies associated with their delivery of services, capital programs, more akin to a water care type structure than what its current model is. Over the hill, they say, the Wairarapa, there are 4 councils that have done arrangements, and probably the closest alignment to what you're trying to do here. So if you have opportunities to talk to Tauri or Wairarapa, and master and we'll keep doing it, what you've got confidence there, they can achieve probably what you want to achieve. We help them actively. We'll work through the financials for them. We're now currently in negotiations, helping them join together to find arrangements. We're putting in supply agreements that will help them continue to have service provided by those councils until they figure out the longer term plan. And we're streamlining the CCO establishment to make it really cost effective. And they have an initial budget of $3 million. We see there's nothing near that sort of money required. So we're down to maybe $100,000 and setting it up. And that's purely because they want some specifics in the way that the legal support is driven from the Constitution, shareholders agreement arrangement. We've got a template on. We can give you that. If you're happy with it, that's great. But they want some points which are specific to each of the areas. And so we're just allowed to work on that. South Island's a little bit different. That's why I sort of commend you on doing well. I think it's one of the bigger groups that are trying to create a joint effort. North Canterbury's been going for a while, but it's me, Waikura and one. So they've been going for a while now. They're still in discussions. I've realised how hard it is to try and actually get a joint arrangement. And what I'm encouraging everyone to do is start thinking jointly is, what's in it for yourselves? What's the best thing you can achieve as a result of this? And make those rules, because there's no hidden agendas in this. There's no equality required. It's actually a negotiation to get what you think is best for your organisation. Metering, all these things that are really important to others, but maybe not to you, then that's up to you. And that's the way I need to think. And sure, there might be some compromise out there around, but some of the benefits of those joint arrangements, particularly in a capital risk space where instead of your capital program, you're now talking about full council joining and you'd like to get others interested in delivering that on your behalf. And that aligned with, what the government's trying to do with setting up the legislation to enable it to be a lot easier for CCOs to set up and operate, as well as the deep capacity that's been made available to CCOs. Means that ultimately you can take positions where you're a bit more aggressive on capital delivery, and you can, if you were to do 50 million next year, you could say we actually need 100 million. And a good example of that's levels in 2010, when Franklin District Council, which is one of the councils that came into the super city, only had about 6% hold in the total group, and it had an amp of about 80 million in 2009. And the first year of the new entity, Watercare spent 160 million in 1 year. In fact, still organised for treatment problems for 30 years. So they could never achieve that in another life. And they were one of the ones sceptical about being still a trainer setting up a joint arrangement, which albeit compulsory, still had concerns with councillors. So, there are some benefits to be achieved through group association, not only the traction of talent you'll get because you're creating something new, but, I get that there are bigger councils to either side, but I'll also sit there and say what you're doing to create a sort of buzz in the industry around this area that will attract the people you need, the caliber you need to get things done, and especially around the need focus on the objectives and the efficiencies that genuinely come from those individuals being able to bring some level of innovation to this result. So my pause here, because I know you've got questions and probably a little bit more time to that.
They talk about efficiencies and we talk about cost. And budgeting for future work is a very, very hard thing to do. And the issue is in agriculture, both Tracy and agriculture, water is a major infrastructure. We invest in it all the time. And I'm not sure some of our contractors are as good at investing in it as we do. We've got so many schemes in Central Otago. How do you get economies of scale other than the management structure, which we've got in the council? When you've got 80 hook connections or whatever you might have in one town and 150 there, or not being disrespectful to Auckland, but you've probably got a lot of people that can hook into one big line and run a 4-metre pipe from the Waikato River. So we have, by nature, we've got a lot of little playgrounds and then a couple of people watching them.
Yeah.
So I don't know how we become more efficient other than in costing or contracting. And the systems around how we contract are pretty hard to break into. If your Skivingtons want to break into the water network, the modern system protects the operators that are there now. So the chance of having economies of scale on work are limited by the contractual arrangements we have with the existing contract.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, but I'll also say that, having seen this play out a number of times, that, when you bring people together and you have a bigger arrangement to look at, you tend to take a different view on what that would look like as opposed to being in isolation. So, a good example would be if you need a new water treatment plant, and one of those water councils, and I'll use this specific example, has delivered a really good patch plant in place. And I would say, then why are we going to do a separate design consent approach on the side when somebody already has that? And also that scale allows you to have better conversations with the likes of a Christchurch, Royal Lamington, or even the Dorking, because you've got something that allows you the capacity to deal with it. So you become more strategic in your application. So for me, it's there is huge amounts to possibly say with standardisation. And whether that's design, consenting, or procurement, those sorts of things are where you'll see. I'd be surprised if this thing doesn't produce at least 10 to 15 to 20% efficiencies, let alone the wastewater standards coming in and a wastewater treatment plant that you might have in your books, because I know you've got consents about a third of them coming out in the next 5 years. If you were to develop that cost of it now, it would be probably 40% higher than what will come once the new wastewater standards come in. So I'm telling people between 15 and 25 is trying to be conservative in what the wastewater standards will do. But again, even that approach is more about get the cookie cutter working across the country so that you're not beholden to regional councils that will pay you the deliver these services.
So has that really been what we've been fighting against, that bureaucratic argument, no matter what we design? And this is allowing the stamping cookie cutter basically, and this is what's required, and that's all that's required.
Yeah. Just a lot of people in petition for this. I want to get the apologies because at the end of the day, we're saying billions across New Zealand if they ever standardise the way we do this.
And that's been the problem with elected members, because all of a sudden the staff come up with a methodology, and all of a sudden they come back and several years down the road, something's changed and they're going to come again. And you watch escalation happen in front of you, and you budget them something, and the escalation comes under, oh no, the plant's now cost $3 more million. That's it.
And the reason for that is the standards are so high in New Zealand that really only 30% of people and councils comply with it. What I'm saying is the technology is back from standard. Bring the standard back to the technology. They'll make everyone 100%.
Yeah,
yes, the technology.
You would argue we've all been asking for that for the last 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah, so we've got governance to put that in place, and we'll see some wastewater standards evaluated on behalf over the next month.
And the argument to the wastewater standards coming back is how many of those plants that we've been fighting to get right will now be compliant with.
Marlon, do you have a view on prioritisation? Because one of the questions that come up when you go into a regional grouping, that councils can prioritise their water assets where they wish to invest and when they wish to invest. When you go into a grouping, then it's going to be a board and the chief executive of a water service that will do that piece. How do you allay concerns around how councils elevate their priority so that, you know, it doesn't slow down growth? That's a real question.
Yeah, no, and that's a good question, because I've had it from a number of councils around the area. How do we make sure our communities continue to get invested in by this new entity? And the key document obviously is the nature of the agreement that you set this in uplift, and you put it in with your rules and your, you know, what you expect in that agreement. But I would also sit here and say, because this new entity has greater capacity and capability to deliver these things, we'll actually get more. I don't want to preempt that, but ultimately, if you're saying that as a group, across the 4 councils, you're going to be delivering $100 million or $200 million a year, you can actually bring a lot forward because of the way that the legislation has been written to allow for taking debt, for example. And don't be afraid of debt. I get questioned a lot, because what I'm saying is that the current legislation doesn't allow for the investment profile to match the debt profile. So councils have been buying 7 years out on 100-year infrastructure. Yeah. And that's just ridiculous. So at least now this TCO legislation will allow 35-year investment debt through the food line. You get a lot of certainty in your cost structure as you move forward. So for me, those sorts of combinations allow you to optimise their investment profile, which we're building our treatment plant that will cover the next 3 generations. We want those 3 generations to pay. So you can structure things in a way that the current users are trained for the future users. And that's what I've seen a lot, because fund-based grants are very here. You've got to invest significantly in their assets. So what that tells me is the current generation's favour. When you look at their rates, it's really high. And if I was to go out there and say to them, as ratepayers, you're paying for something that you're going to give benefit to for the next 2 generations, I'm sure they'd be quite listening. No, it's invisible thing, and you're a growth council, so growth is really important. And I would look, having had a look at the accounts, I think you've covered it before it adequately. Obviously costs will escalate, the prices will out, but hopefully through some of these investment, these decisions that we're making, whether it's an automation or CCO, you'll see a lot more smooth associated with that. You'll be able to cash a lot better.
Because to Peter's point, it's not just water, drinking water or wastewater, it's also planning around subdivisions and putting in underground infrastructure. And if we have a regional entity, you've broken that. Yeah, no, there's a internal link between the planning and regulatory and the 3 waters division. Yeah,
that's a really good question. So for me though, the answer to that is the planning still sits with council. This vehicle is just the delivery. So if you as a group of councils say Cromwell needs to grow very significantly and cater for X population over the next 10 years, you just need to know it's going to happen. Order the entity will deliver that on your part. You can't get out of that obligation. So if anything, I'd be saying to that industry, you want 20,000 people there rather than 5. Obviously, there comes with cost and there's conversations that we can have, certainly that sort of population alive. But that's you don't lose that planning control. All you're losing is the delivery, which is something that still maintain control of sidelines.
So in that theory, unless I picked it up wrong, and Cromwell is that example, that if the board, and James is on the board, and they say, look, we've seen this projected income grow, this growth, we are going to invest in a 20-year, $20,000 plan now, which ultimately will have an effect if you're going to borrow $200 million on their ratepayer base across the end. And people are actually going, well, what the hell? We've got population decline, but we're funding. I mean, for me, it would be the most logical thing you should do if you want to look at intergenerational growth in a region. But of course, when you haven't got growth, and there will be some regions that won't have growth.
Yeah, I mean, that entity can take a more informed decision around whether it invests in small chunks or larger chunks. And I'd probably suggest as a council now, you're investing in small chunks.
Yeah.
As opposed, we've got another part of the population. Whereas that entity might take a 30-year view and say, actually, it's more efficient for us to build something that has capability and won't burden that community.
So therefore, if you take that approach and you have got a whole lot of new pipe in the ground in the first 30 years, why are we being away at depreciation and paying those assets? Because obviously you just said before, you got 100-year assets that now are painful. But that's if we go through with that approach, you will have a lot of new infrastructure.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's a
Which is cool.
Yeah, I'd still say it's the right thing to do. I would also take a view that you got to almost, as a specialist entity, it will be able to better match that profile. More informed decisions than councils in a room getting 5 minutes every month to talk about it. You know, so for me, there is still some benefit in allowing an entity to take a long-term view over how those assets will be managed.
Would they have a view on our depreciation levels?
Yeah.
Who would say that? So the group would say, look, you guys, we've just banged on 150 kilometres of brand new pipe in Cromwell, and it's $230 million investment over your 30-year depreciation. You're actually now, like we've had that discussion about 50% depreciation or 100%. But we could have massive chunks of depreciation and infrastructure coming on board if the board was aggressive.
I don't think that position, because that's what the Commerce Commission is about, and making sure that those price rises are justified. And that's one of the issues of doing an in-house water entity, because there is no such thing as status quo. It's an enhanced status quo because the regulator will be overseeing the price that's charged to customers. And if it's in-house, ComCom will have to take a view of the entire council operations, investigate everything that it does to determine whether water's being appropriately charged for that activity. So it's it's really tough and intrusive. And you don't have to look far to see that. I use Victoria and Australia as an example of what that regime looks like and how it plays out. So, there are other checks and balances. And for me, as someone who's operated in an unregulated environment for 20 years, there are decisions you make that aren't in the best interests of consumers, right? And at least having a regulator, they might get it wrong for the first 5 years, but they'll get it consistently wrong until they get it right. For me, that's a lot more comforting. It should provide a lot more comfort to the spirit of getting the right level of charges for your ratepayers and consumers of services in your region.
Can I ask a question around stranded assets? You're the regional entity, so all of a sudden, with this organisation, that was the third business has just disappeared, and all of a sudden we've got loads of companies that cover over a smaller base. Has that been a problem elsewhere?
Yeah, it is. But the way I've addressed it in other councils that are working together now is said that it's your rules. If you want a 3-year or 5-year or 10-year agreement with that water entity to manage those costs at a time, do it that way. There's no one saying you have to separate it completely and leave it and all the council picks up all this overhead that doesn't know what to do or can't manage it effectively. So, yeah, I'm saying I've helped you with the specifics. You know exactly what help better with the specifics, but for me, it's just a matter of this is one of the conditions of us going ahead, is that we want this arrangement so that we can continue to reduce our costs at this time.
So are you able to, I struggle to visualise how it's something you look on the ground. So we're talking about Luca and Gore and Waitaki and CABC. All of them have got their own key water departments.
Yeah.
And also you've got a new region ministry. How would that actually play out practically? Are you going to take a setting office somewhere?
No, you don't have to do that. Again, it might be one of your key criteria that you have skilled labour in your area. And I would encourage it, right? Because the last thing you want is to be in for hills. Now you're gonna get service here. That doesn't mean like you would London. So, you know, for me, it's really what's important to you. And there are about a dozen criteria and, you know, metering. Is that important to you or not? You know, I would say, probably given how much water is being used in this region, I would certainly encourage it. I'm a big fan of it.
We have it.
But-
We meet around.
So why is it, what do you say?
Because
So there is irrigation.
Because our.
People that use the treated water, they irrigate their lawns to make them look beautiful because the house value was doubled in the last 2 years. I want to keep with like capital gains. So that's basically water from the gold mining days to now is the most important fabric of this community. But I'll go with Nigel. If we're going to become so efficient, and there's 4 entities, 3 of those entities will have to lose their staffing structure for it to be efficient.
No, what happens is, this is how it plays out. Everyone gets together, they all figure out who's in the zoo, and then they start thinking about what they're doing in their individual areas, and they pick the best way forward. Because actually, when you get the 4 water managers together, or the 4 wastewater, you know, leads together, that's actually really good. And I wouldn't get rid of any staff to create the efficiency that way. What you do is, as people move on, you won't replace them. And for me, that's a better way to deal with it. So, and that's only small. That's not where you get your efficiencies. Reducing staff is one element of it. Yeah, sure, but actually you get the efficiencies in the capital delivery program, you get the efficiencies in the operational program, and they're millions of dollars. Don't mess around with the chunk change. Let them do what they need to do. They're doing it really well, and I'll only get better with the focus. So for me, the capital program is a big issue. And you'll find ways through streamlining alone to save millions and millions of dollars. That will benefit this council, and you get more projects delivered as a result. So your private projects will push forward. That's how it plays out typically when you see these things play over time. And locations. Yeah.
the other thing to remember is we've got to deliver more. You know, even under an enhanced status quo, that the program is much bigger, that there's more regulatory monitoring and workload requirements and stuff. So if we stayed the same, we'd have to start up more, whereas we'll get that streamlined. So it's not about losing staff, it might be not about not increasing staff.
Yeah, that's good. And what I've typically seen is councils are constrained, right? So when you go into these other opportunities, we'll get moving around and you've got people who are focused on reducing costs and delivery. Those things about sitting outside, but constrained there, all of a sudden start preparing back in.
So my simple brain tells me, why haven't you been here 10 years ago talking about how we become more efficient doing what we're doing? Because effectively it's like you've got a lightning bolts aren't have the most efficient way of doing it, but we've been struggling against regulation because it's just too hard and everything changes, you never catch up. But if you advise councils and came in as a consultant as you are to the government, effectively working, we'd be far better off 20 years ago.
Oh, yeah, attempt to retire, I think.
But I mean, that's what we've been struggling with.
Look, that's why I'm out there trying to help as many people as I can, and I'll only help those that will help. That's the element now. And there are a number of councils actually who've been putting up barriers and some of this region. But, you know, I'm just genuinely trying to get the best outcome for you. So if you see some value in that, I'll press hard and we'll get something really good done. But, yeah.
Have you got a view on harmonisation on acquisition prices? And what's been the experience?
Yeah, harmonisation is an interesting concept. I'm a fan of it because it makes the complexities inside the business a lot easier to run. Auckland, for example, had 44 different tariffs in 2010. We reduced it to 4. With that, the efficiency became just in the system IT alone for millions, let alone the fact that we didn't need 200 call center people, but we did get rid of them. It's now down to, I think it went down to 40 when I was running it, but I think it's now back to 60 or something. So it just depends on personality, right? But for me, there's this natural synergy and simplifying everything you do. I've seen every operation around the country, and I can tell you, that's done 67 buildings. It's not over.
Harmonisation, isn't it? People must have to make it.
Yeah, but I get your concerns around, we've got to protect what we think is right. And I'd say do that. Absolutely do that. And then leave it up to the entity to come back to you and say, actually, now you're not benefiting from this approach. So when you write the rules, price harmonisation is critical to you. Keep that. I can advise you whether you